So good morning. Maybe we can start our conference. Rebooting the debate, generative AI and creative work. I don't know if you stayed up to watch the debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. Then you're probably tired. But we are here on a different topic. My name is Knut Detlefsen. I'm the new director of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation's Competence Center on the Future of Work. I just arrived from Washington, D.C., where I represented the foundation for 6 years, and which was, of course, quite a political ride. And now I'm very happy to be here in Brussels with you and to represent the foundation here in the capacity where we focus on labor relations, the future of labor. But I would also say, in a broader sense, you know, what kind of working society do we want to live in, and where can we establish just distribution of technological progress, but at the same time not stifle creativity and freedom. So that would be how I would summarize our task, but also to look, of course, we are not operating in an ideal world. We are operating in a world of conflicts, and not only competition, but war and challenges. And so we also, at the same time, if we sit here in Europe and Brussels, have, of course, to think about where are we, and that work and working society also contributes to the strength of our society and the inner strength of our society, I would say. So, and I hope this conference will contribute to that. And I would like to welcome you. I think we have a very interesting lineup. We will start with Brando Benifei, member of the European Parliament and the rapporteur on the Parliament's AI Act. I think that will be very fascinating to hear what you have to say. And then later on, we have Alan Stutzman from the Writers Guild of the US, who led the battle for the Hollywood writers and trade unions successfully to push back against the unrestricted use of generative AI, and she has interrupted a conference in Ireland to be here with us. So a very warm welcome, and we are very glad that you made it despite the strikes that we, of course, support because they are for workers' rights, but we are glad that you could make it despite the strikes. I would also like to welcome Daniel Mügge, who will moderate this whole event, and that is, of course, a very important task. It is very difficult to organize a conference like this without help, and we have had great support during the preparation process from Paul Keller, the Director of Policy at Open Future, so thank you very much for helping us. And we had our close partners at UNI Europa, thanks to Oliver Rötig and his team, particularly to David Espinosa and Daniel Kopp. So thank you very much for helping to bring this event together. And I'm very glad that we have participants from very diverse backgrounds, trade unionists, representatives of creative workers, NGOs, from different European institutions, and also from business and the employer side. And this shows, I think, that the topic of generative AI and in the creative sector is of significant political interest, and that we will have a very interesting morning. And I will leave it there. And I would like to also say later on we will have more elected representatives who will join the discussion. Alexandra Giese from the Greens will join us, and also Alex Agui-Saliba, also member of the European Parliament from the S&D group. Unfortunately, the Conservative representative of the member of the European Parliament, Alex Voss, who was excited to join this debate, had now another political commitment that overrides this opportunity to speak here, so he won't join us, but he regrets that. But I think anyhow, with all of you, and I hope you will be actively participating in the discussions. I think we will have a very interesting morning, and will make sure that we debate, the challenges that come with AI as a new technology which is being used, and how this technological process can benefit those that create and also move technological progress forward, and not stifle freedom. I think that is very important. So I leave it there, and I leave it to Brando to kick us off, and then to Daniel Mügge to moderate the rest of the morning. A very warm welcome from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, the Foundation for Social Democracy. If you don't know us, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us, the General Foundation. You can also follow on other social media channels. Check out our work. In particular, the Competence Center for the Future of Work has many interesting publications. And if you check out our website and our LinkedIn profile, I think you will find some interesting stuff. So do that and follow us and support us digitally. We very much appreciate it. Thank you very much for being here with us. And now, very warm welcome for Brando.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm sorry that due to the ongoing work on the hearings, I will not be able to stay after my introductory considerations. But I see friends and companions of the work on the AI in the room, on which we were all engaged for some time. As the European Union has decided to take the lead in starting a regulatory work on AI, the first in the world to go in this direction of an horizontal regulation that could encompass the whole spectrum of risks that arise from the use of AI, and at the same time work to build trust and understanding. I want to thank the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and also, I must say, Justin Nogarede, who I work with also in the FEPS context on this topic, also when it was less sexy, less at the center of the discussion. But now everyone is talking about AI, rightly so, because things are changing very fast. If you look at the progress made by generative AI in the last 2 years, it's impressive. It's incredible how things have changed so quickly in terms of the capabilities, in terms also of the penetration in consumers' life and in the world of work, as we are talking in the context of the center that also focuses on that. I must underline that. And we had not only to deal with work in general, with the work on the AI Act, knowing there were limits because some issues could not be tackled fully due to an issue of legal base. So we have worked on certain spaces that we could use in the Legislative Act. I can recount the fact that we have introduced the prohibition on emotion recognition in the workplaces. We have introduced the obligation to inform workers of and the representatives of the use of AI in the workplace. The workplace in general is in the high risk categorization, etc. But we also focused on the creative work, especially with a specific angle, that is the protection of copyright and protection of creativity in general. This aspect of the capability of guaranteeing the possibility of an opt-out on the use of content, but also the possibility to know what was actually used, are important also for other purposes, I would say. But for sure, one important purpose that was at the center of a discussion with many stakeholders during the negotiations is to ensure that we can find a way to remunerate better the creative work that now feeds the generative AI systems. Today, the way these systems learn is based on a lot of human material produced by human creativity that is not recognized and not remunerated in any way. So the objective of the norms that we approved were clear. We didn't want to push for more conflict. We didn't want to create a lot of judicial trials or proceedings. We want to support a better position for creatives to negotiate a good condition for their works to be used. Because at the same time, we posed to ourselves the question of not hindering innovation through the use of these materials. We do not want to impede the generative AI to develop also in Europe, also with European material, because you know there is a lot of debate now about this issue of where can the business on AI develop? Can they develop in Europe with this legislation? Because to be honest, this is the right question. Every other question I hear, to be frank, about the AI Act, about the Data Act, about the interaction with the GDPR, with the DSA, DMA, often are very ill-posed questions. They have no real substance, in my view, in terms of the impact on competitiveness. The issue of the access to quality data sets, the issue of how we train AI, how we build the systems, and in this sense, yes, this is an issue, I agree. And the way all the rules interact, also Draghi report refers to that in one part. It doesn't say AI Act is bad, as I heard by some commentators. It says something I agree with, that if there is confusion and overlapping of the norms, things will not work. Also in this field that we talk about today, the copyright protection, the protection of creative work, etc. So we need clarity. We need to have a clear system. We also need it to be operative. I want to get to the conclusion of my introductory reflections, also looking at how operatively we do. Because AI Act, we put in the Act two important principles inside the bigger chapter of transparency that includes also another important topic linked to this, that is the recognizability of AI-generated content, the watermarking of AI-generated content. I'm sure this topic will be touched again later today. But on the copyright protection, we both have an opt-out and the sufficiently detailed summary of what was actually used. So to give a bargaining power or a veto power if they don't want at all to be exploited to the creatives. The issue you can imagine is especially about the detailed summary. Because the opt-out, you see that the generative AI companies, the big tech in general, they already provide that voluntarily, very often, because they know in the end they need to do it, because it's also based on another legislation. It's based, for example, in Europe on the copyright directive. Simply the AI Act tries to make it easier to apply. But the other principle, the transparency on what was actually used, is the one where you see the strongest lobbying, so the thing doesn't work. To be very frank, there is already, still today, an active lobbying for this to fail, for this to not work, because the AI office now will have to deliver in terms of how we do this. And I can tell you, I think it's important, I'm sure this is important for all of you, the Parliament will organize itself with the monitoring group for this start of the implementation phase. It will be finalized with internal proceedings at the middle of October. So from the middle of October, we will have a formal structure to monitor this implementation, which entails various things. The guidelines on the prohibitions, which are about to kick in. In 6 months, the prohibitions need to be in place, so the Commission has to deliver in terms of guidelines. Prohibitions include, as we are talking about work, the one I mentioned earlier, the prohibition for the emotional recognition of workers in workplaces. This is very important to be acted quickly because we have a short time. Then the rest of the AI Act, as you know, has about 1.5 years to 2 years to enter into force. And the work on the codes of practice for the most powerful models has started. But also we need to have in a short time, in I would say 8-9 months, a definite set of templates, as we call them, to pursue those actions that are foreseen by the law and are the rights for the right holders. That is to have the certainty of the possibility to opt out, not based on a concession, not based on voluntary willingness from the skies of the generative AI gods, a legal certainty, and to be ensured that they can look at what has been used. You know, and I conclude on this, there are famous trials ongoing on the other side of the Atlantic. Our objective, however, is to avoid that only big publishers, big organizations can stand in a judicial fight with the big tech. This is a risk that we have if we do not construct the system well. We risk that only a few very powerful right holders will be able to obtain satisfaction. We do not want that. Instead, we want to push so that there can be more agreements. We want agreements to be found and to avoid conflict. This is our idea as legislators, if it will be possible. But we also want safeguards so that if agreement is not there, the creative worker can be sure that it can be protected from complete exploitation of their work. Then there are other topics I will not talk about, but that are important. I mentioned one to conclude, the other way around, not only the input for and the issue of protecting the input coming from human creativity towards the generative AI, but the other way around. What do we say about what is produced by creatives through the use of generative AI? This topic is also an emerging topic. What kind of protection we give to this creative work, where it should be attributed, who is the owner of what has been created. This is also another topic, another chapter of the discussion. But now, I mean, the real final message I want to give you is that we need to be all quite active, aware, committed, as I have to say, all the organizations of the creators and the artists in Europe have been, from music to journalism to writers to designers. They have been active in pushing for this legislation to be effective, to be there, to be sustainable. But I have to say the pressure is very high. I was there in the trilogues. The member states were very pushed on this to water down directly at the level of the prime ministers. And also the debate in the parliament will need to to continue in terms of how much we push the Commission to stay in line on this topic, which is, I insist, not obvious, because I've seen it. It's where a lot of economic interests lie. In the AI Act architecture, you can have the interest of the one that doesn't want rules for the most powerful models, but the immediate economic interest is in the usage of content to train AI systems. And so the money is there, the attention is there, the push to not, in fact, go on in this direction will be there. So we need to check that what we have written in the text will be implemented, will be correctly pursued. And this is also the task of the Parliament for the next months with the institutions and also with all of you, because we also need you to be part of this work. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Brando. We appreciate that you took the time to come over here to talk to us, even though I thought you had a meeting in a minute, at least that's what I thought, at 10. So please double check, or maybe I mistook that. But fantastic that you could come. A welcome to you all. My name is Daniel Mugger. I am a professor of political arithmetic at the University of Amsterdam. If you wonder what on earth that is, I'm happy to tell you in the break. I won't waste any time on that now. Two items of housekeeping before we get into the throes of these issues. The first one is, we're taking pictures at this event. Should you not want to be photographed, we have stickers available that you can just place on your jacket or a sweater or whatever that are over there at the desk back there. Please just go and fetch one, and then we'll make sure that you won't be visually represented in the material that we put online. The other one is, and Knut has already mentioned that Axel Voss unfortunately won't be able to join us. And what we do is that we take the little bit of time that we had allotted to him to move our program 5 minutes around. So what we'll do is we'll conclude this panel at 11:15, and then have half an hour of a coffee break, and then reconvene at 11:45. So we have a little bit of extra time for this panel right here. Now, we have fantastic guests here today to speak about the issues that are connected to generative AI and creative work. And I think many of them, because they actually work very deeply in this field, know a lot more about it than I do, so I don't want to take too much time here. But in terms of scene setting, there are a few things that I think are important for us to remember. If you go back 10 years from today and talked about AI and public policy, then one of the key issues was jobs, automation. AI was going to eat our jobs. And also, if you go back 10 years, and Brando already mentioned it, we had the copyright directive for the digital single market in 2019, finally. A lot of the talk around that concerned news aggregators, for example, right? And then just 2 years ago, generative AI burst onto the scene and in many ways disrupted these debates. It was true for the AI negotiations to a certain degree, but I think it's also true for the conversation that we're having here today, right? So today we're no longer having the conversation whether AI is going to eat all our jobs and we'll end up in a workless society. That doesn't seem to be happening at all. And instead, the debate has shifted towards what is happening to the quality of our work, the satisfaction that workers get, to the security that we can afford them. So to that degree, I think we're ready for a reboot of the what does AI do to our jobs. And at the same time, the reason that generative AI has become so important is because of the massive impact that it has on the creative sector. So when we were thinking about what does AI do to jobs 10 years ago, one of the key issues would have been whether we have self-driving trucks on the roads, right? And would be truckers that will be out of jobs. And now it turns out, because of the power of generative AI, and Brando talked about that, it feels that the creative sector has become the ground zero for the impact that generative AI has on the world of work. So in that sense, for me, the conversation that we're having here today is about the creative sector, and it's about a number of other issues that are related to that, but it's also how do we, with this sector that seems to be at the heart of this AI transformation in our economy and labor markets, how do we start thinking about to what degree public authorities have an obligation to somehow build safeguards around jobs, around workers in this field, to what degree there are broader considerations that need to be taken into account, maybe whether the role of unions needs to be redefined, whether there are extra obligations that employers have in this world of AI and work. There is a lot of negotiation happening in this town, obviously. When we discuss policy, the AI Act, Brando has been occupied for years negotiating these sorts of things. And that's, of course, an important part of making policy, but I hope that we can also use this morning that we have here together, and there are many of you here in the room who work with these issues professionally, on the one hand, to take a step back. When I say take a step back, what I mean is when I came to AI, I'm a political economist by training and started getting into the throes of AI maybe 8 years ago, it was mainly because this technology made me uneasy. I was reading things in the newspaper, this is not my background, I'm not a computer scientist. I was reading things in the newspaper where I emotionally got a little bit upset. I wondered, what was the future of our societies? What was the future of creativity going to be? This unease is what's tied me to the issue of AI. And often when I talk to people and also talk to people who deal professionally with AI, whether as policymakers or people who work in the AI sector or elsewhere, they have professional opinions, but somewhere deep down they also have an emotional response to whether this is good news or bad news or maybe no news. And I hope that we can somehow also integrate this aspect, like our own introspection and reflection on what on earth is happening to our societies as we move into this AI age, can include that into our conversation, because I think in the background it's important. It's not just about legal arguments. And at the same time, I think it's important to become concrete. Knut already mentioned it. One of our guests today is Alan Stutzman from the Writers Guild of America, where we have a very concrete example of taking action to do something about how generative AI has an impact on the world of work. But also, of course, and again, this is something that Brando already mentioned, there is legislation in place, of course, the Copyright Directive from 2019, but also the AI Act. And now the question is, how can we make that rubber hit the road and actually turn it into something meaningful? Do we feel that the legal framework that we have actually gets the job done? What do people who work on different sides of these fences in different sectors here, what do they experience as the real issues on the work floor? How do these things matter? Is maybe the debate tilted in a way that we exaggerate the fears that people have about creativity and AI and maybe underappreciate the opportunities that are in there? So on the one hand, I would like us to be able to take a step back and say, okay, what really is the issue? What's the problem here? And why do we need to address it? And at the same time, and it's also something as we move through this morning into the second panel where we have several members of the European Parliament joining us, also come up with concrete steps as to, okay, given where we stand right now at the beginning of October 2024, what are the additional steps that need to be taken? Do we need different legislation? Do we need bottom-up action from unions? Do we simply need proper enforcement? And that's all it takes, right? These are the issues that are on the table. Now, without further ado, let me invite the members of the first panel here onto the stage. So we have, in the order that they're listed in the program, there's no deeper sense behind that, that was simply alphabetically, Hannes Studinger and Alan Stutzman, Portrait XO, and Frédéric Pascal onto the stage. Give them a round of applause. You can just sit in any order that you want. Now, I have invited them to give us a few introductory remarks before we head into the debate. And as I said, I realize that there are a lot of people here in this room today who are actually very familiar with the issues at play. So I really do want to make sure that in both of the panels we have ample time for you to share your own reflections, your own perspectives with us here today. But before we go into that and also allow the four of you to maybe share and react to each other's opinions, I do want to give each of you the chance to basically give us like your core take on the issues that we're on the table here. And Hannes, if for no other reason than that you are first in the panel, let's start with you. Hannes is from UNI, which is, if I understand it correctly, basically sort of like an umbrella organization of service sector unions here in Europe. Hannes.
Hello. This is working, right? Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Maybe before starting to put that in context for those who don't know UNI, to give you a little bit more context about what we are, what we represent, who we represent, and what we do. UNI is a global union federation, represents about 700 unions in the services sector. That's ranging from banking, finance, IT, tech, graphical, commerce, property services, and also media entertainment. Some of you might have been impacted by a strike yesterday in Belgium through our members of the catering, property services, and cleaning sector. So apologies for the inconvenience, but it's for a good cause, as those members that we represent also have issues that need to be addressed, including by the European Commission for decent work. I myself, I'm heading the Secretariat for the Media and Entertainment and Art sector. That's about 140 unions and guilds representing, our members represent very different crafts, ranging from creators to technicians, artistic technicians, but also a lot of behind-the-scene workers that sometimes get not mentioned or thought of when you look at transformation processes of our industry, but are actually crucial to make audiovisual works or performances come to life. When we look at AI from a union perspective, I would say a couple of basic things and then maybe address what has been asked of us to reflect a little bit about the opportunities and threats or challenges. Looking at the basics, I would say that AI, and in particular generative AI, is certainly a massive technological change. However, actually unions, it's one of their core business is to help shape technological change. That's what the core job is of unions. And in the context of AI, our job is to assess as good as we can what the likely impact is on the industry, on the workplace, on the job opportunities, but also on the working condition, rights, pay and remuneration, and most profoundly for the dignity of workers that are affected by the introduction of new technology. And unions have done that for many decades. And there are three tools how to do it. One is collective bargaining. We'll hear more from Alan, one of our member organizations in the US, in a few moments, how this is done. Social dialogue, more social dialogue, it's meaning dialogue with employers outside of the scope of collective bargaining, and that could relate to skilling, which is also a very important subject when we touch on technological change and generative AI. And last but not least is regulatory advocacy. So we heard the good intentions from EU policymakers to protect copyright. We can only echo that, and I'm sure today there will be a lively debate whether the instrument that have been proposed will be enough. Before reflecting on the opportunities and threats of the introduction of generative AI in our sector, let me put forward two principles that I believe are consensus among our 140 unions and guilds. The first one is that the introduction and deployment of generative AI needs to be based on a human-centered approach. That means, very basically, the introduction of this technology should not displace but augment human capacities. And also when it is introduced, deployed in the workplace, that those who work are at the center of the deployment. Their skills, their experience, their creativity need to be at the heart. And they need to be consulted, not only consulted or informed like some regulation is proposing, but actually they need to be at the heart of the process. The second principle that we believe strongly in is creation is a human activity. It cannot be that AI is distort, or diminish the rights of authors, co-authors, and performers. That must be the guiding principle of any legislative action, but also about negotiations when it comes to fairly remunerating those who create works and creative works. I would say both are principles, but you will see in my reflections, they are also at the heart of the challenges and opportunities that we collectively face. So let me give you a couple of my thoughts on opportunities and challenges from our perspective and how unions need to address that. Basically, two opportunities. One is stimulation of creativity. There's no doubt that technology always has, and generative AI is no exception, will augment the capacities of creative workers and artists to gain more time allotted to their creative tasks by displacing less creative tasks to technology. That's certainly one opportunity for those work. Secondly, the more globally in the ecosystem is the gains of productivity. Faster processes, better processes. We hope, and that is that those productivity gains will be used to save time in a good manner. It's no secret that our industry is probably one of the worst in terms of working hours. And if productivity gains would be used to better plan productions, that could be used to actually gain work-life balance for those who actually put in a lot of working hours in their lives and a lot of weekends. And actually unions are already negotiating right now on that model with employers. But let me focus on the threats and challenges. Unfortunately, there are more than two.
Okay, pick your two most important ones. I think the list is long, probably, right?
Well, you know, I mean, I mentioned copyright, so maybe let me mention three. So the protection of authors and performance rights is really key. And I think it's, you know, the discourse we hear here is a lot of deterministic, especially here in Europe. We always used to run after our good friends on the other side of the Atlantic. And we are persecuted by the idea that if we do regulate too much, we stifle innovation. I've heard that when it came to copyright protection 10 years ago, never came true. Never came true. And here again, be very careful. The second panel will go into deep. So that's the first one. The second one is really on working conditions and pay. You know, for us as unions, the most important is to listen to members and take their voices serious and basically help them to, you know, to turn them into action. When our member unions ask their members about their perception of generative AI, it's quite similar to what you expressed. It's unease, it's uncertainty. They don't know what's coming. They fear about job displacement, but more importantly, they also fear, what will this do to the quality of my job? Will I be still able to freely create? Will I have a place in the team, et cetera, et cetera? So that's a very important challenge that we need to address and then articulate in collective bargaining. And that brings me to the last challenge, which, by the way, is also an opportunity, is collective bargaining. Quite frankly, our employers have even a harder time to come together on that issue. The sector is structured in such a way that we have a few very powerful employers and companies that are of global nature. And then we have a majority of SMEs and even very small companies who gravitate and are usually important for the ecosystem our workers work. And this disparity of resources to deal with this massive new technology is so unequal between these few powerful and the many not so powerful companies. Collective bargaining in our sector is majorly structured on a sector-wide bargaining approach, bringing together those powerful and less powerful companies that we negotiate with. So our challenge is actually that most of the time our employers have a hard time to see eye to eye and then actually have a common position and articulate it to our unions. And we have seen that in many countries now that negotiations, discussions, whether it's in the scope of collective bargaining, also wider social dialogue, have been really, really difficult. Not because the unions were difficult, but because the employers had a hard time. And I think Ellen may say a few words how much has impacted that, the ability for the writers and later the actors to actually get the companies together to actually talk about the details, how to shape AI. And I want to conclude with one thing that is very important for us. For us as union, it's not about protecting an old model in a new world. Not at all. I mean, our members, our working members are on the forefront of technological change. Many of our working members are actually producing AI tools themselves. So it's not about protecting something old in a new world. It's really about shaping it in a way that it allows for a dignified working environment, but also for the prosperity of a sector. And here we have to be very careful about the ecosystem and the balance between powerful companies and less powerful companies and their ability to provide all of them dignified jobs.
All right.
Leave it here.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much, Hannes. Ellen, let me go right to you. As Executive Director of the Writers Guild of America West, you've been at the epicenter of what, at least sort of like in my perception on this side of the Atlantic, emerged as one of the most visible early fights between, on the one hand, workers, and on the other hand, companies that were in the business of deploying AI in ways that workers felt was effectively sidelining them, that was worsening their working conditions, potentially put their jobs at risk. Can you tell us a little bit about how you reflect on that experience and what it was that made you successful in the way that you've been successful? As I said, in this broader debate about what will happen to the working landscape, this seems to be the one example that people return to time and again, which is why we're super grateful to have you here today. It's been a while now. Probably you've had some time to reflect. What were the key factors bringing you in the end and making possible the result that you have achieved?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I mean, I start with the premise of collective power. I mean, I work for a labor union. What made, what we achieved possible last year was workers' ability to come together and withhold their labor until the companies came with an acceptable outcome. But maybe I can just level set a little bit. In the United States, television and film writers are not copyright holders. We have a work-for-hire doctrine where the producers are the copyright holders and our members are their employees. And it is what allows them to be in a labor union in the United States. And it's what's allowed the Writers Guild over many decades to negotiate things like residuals in perpetuity so that writers participate in, the reuse of their copyright and credits and compensation. And so, we approach these issues, every 3 years in collective bargaining. Our last agreement expired May 1, 2023. And as we prepare for collective bargaining, we do that many months in advance. So we're back in 2022, and Chat-GPT had just come out. So obviously it was a concern for writers because it was being, discussed as a replacement for their product. Writers were also dealing with some specific issues in our industry of a speed up, particularly in television. Writers were being asked to do more work in less time with a smaller writing staff and lower pay. And really, AI represented kind of the potential ultimate end game of just one writer and a computer, banging out scripts. And so it was an important issue that we had to bring into collective bargaining. Under our agreement, we have concepts of what is literary material, what is writing and what is not, what's source material. So if writers are provided a book to adapt, that's considered source material. But if they consult a Wikipedia page, it's research, it's not writing. And so our approach with AI-generated material was, in the context of our agreement, it exists, but it's not writing. And so a company can give you AI-generated material, but it will have no impact on a writer's compensation or credits. And so it was a pretty simple approach. When we went into bargaining, the companies stonewalled us. Every time we spoke about it, they had no response. And that obviously became a very galvanizing issue for writers, because when you say nothing, you start to get a little concerned. And it wasn't until the eve of the strike that the companies offered to say that, okay, we'll confirm that, AI is not a writer, is not a human. But that obviously wasn't enough, and there were many other issues. So, writers went on strike, and it wasn't until more than 100 days after being on strike, and obviously SAG-AFTRA had gone out on strike over similar issues, that the companies came back to the table and we had a substantive discussion about artificial intelligence. And in those negotiations, they did essentially agree to our point of view, which is that AI-generated material is not writing. So it won't affect a writer's compensation or credits. Writers cannot be required to use AI. They can if they want to, if a company allows it. And so that speaks to things Johannes brought up, where we have different perspectives among writers, some who hate and will never use, and some who are interested in experimentation. And then the issue that we didn't agree with the companies on is training. So if they want to use the scripts that our members have written, or even the movies that get produced from them, to train AI systems. And the company's perspective, and these are the Disney and Fox and Apple and Amazon, et cetera, was that they don't want to be restricted when companies like OpenAI have just stolen all of our work. And really, they were not doing it. And so we agreed to, defer and reserve our positions, and we'll bargain about that when that becomes a more substantive issue. And for us, the real concern is the companies that we don't have a contractual relationship with, who have just taken all of our works. And so the Writers Guild has a big policy agenda where we engage in the US and we work with our allies here in Europe to address the training issue, because from our perspective, it's not fair use in the US. We don't think it's data and text mining here in the EU to have taken what my members created and build a business model off of stolen work. We think there has to be transparency. There needs to be, affirmative consent, and eventually there'll have to be, negotiations over credits and compensation. And so that's what we have to keep, working on post our deal.
Yeah. Before we move on, Ellen, one question. I think you already mentioned one issue, but I was wondering, looking forward, where do you see sort of like the next issues on the horizon? One you mentioned, you said it's all nice and fine to have agreements with, say, major film studios and the like. That's one thing. But then there is this other category, which is pretty big and growing bigger. OpenAI, but of course a whole range of other companies right there, which sort of like fall outside this relationship. And you mentioned that in principle you would need some kind of political intervention there, a legal framework, for example, which is hard to get by these days in the United States. Are there other issues that, from your membership or simply the way that you see these technologies developing, that you see on the horizon where you say, we'll have to go back to the negotiation table maybe 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now because there are other issues that are starting to bubble up?
I mean, it's hard to say right now. We negotiate, every 3 years because technology does change and union contracts have to adapt. The way AI in the industry, which is really not being used yet, looks like it may develop. It's less about scripts and more about kind of the audiovisual process. Right. And making that a bit more, cost effective. And so, it'll be interesting for us to think about, does the nature of writing change where you maybe aren't generating a script, but you're putting something in and generating an audiovisual output. Our feeling is, that would continue to be, writers' work. And I think, what the strike demonstrated last year is, this is a really important issue for writers that they're willing to fight over. So, if the companies wanted to do things that we don't agree with, I think they would be met with the same resistance as we saw last year. All right. Okay. Thanks.
Let me go to you, Portratixo. People talk about creative work, compensation, all sorts of things. With you, we have somebody who actually does creative work, right? You're somebody who in some ways, seems to be sort of like in the fulcrum of what this means. Both the maybe new kinds of constraints that artists may face, but also all the opportunities that arise out of this technology, and maybe sort of like a first-hand experience also, what it does to artists' perception of self, what it is that they're doing, what the creative process is, what the nature of this is. So we're super glad to have you here. Would be great if you could share, so like as an artist, maybe both to the audience, so those of them who maybe don't know, what kind of work you actually do and where AI figures in that, and how that enters that conversation, but also how then from that perspective you look at the kinds of conversations that we're having here, whether it's a threat, whether it's an opportunity, and whether we're even asking the right questions from the perspective of an artist.
Hello, does this work? Okay, great. Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful to be here. I share a lot of the sentiments that have already been shared. I also started in AI as a musician because of my own fears and speculations around it. And I think we're in this really interesting time where we had a conversation last night during dinner about the history of copyright and how the reasons for changes have changed based on the behavioral needs. And now I think when we talk about copyright in the context of AI, at the root and the core of it is about human rights, because on the broader scale, it's about the use of our data, identity, whether it's in text, audio, or visual form. And so that changes the entire dialogue around it as well. And I do agree, we have new problems, so we need new solutions. We can't use the same methods and the mechanics as well. So one of the things that that really stuck out to me back in 2015 when I first got introduced to generative AI models, collaborating with data scientists, I was offered the opportunity to train an AI model based on my own work. And at the time, it was even more abstract than now. What does that even mean to select a data set for training? And so we had a lot of discussions, and even then I knew that this was going to become a really huge problem and open so many challenges. And so I very intentionally decided on training my own data set, so starting with my own vocals, just to understand what that whole process felt like. And based on that approach, I assumed back then that there shouldn't be any copyright issues. If you have your own material, small data, and you use an AI model and you generate new works from it, there shouldn't be any copyright issue at all. But then I tested that and I tried to register through US Copyright Office a short film concept that I had based on a music video that I made. And the idea was to co-create with AI on the audio and the visuals. And the storyline was based on me. And the response from the Copyright Office was they denied my application, but it wasn't just that, the questions they asked were so irrelevant. Did I take a photo of my work by clicking the shutter of a camera? So the questions are also just really strange, and that this was back in 22, so a lot has changed. But I do think that what's optimistic about where we are now, at least in the space of music and AI, is that there are mechanics that exist that have been substantiated as the business model. I can name actually two examples. There's Newtone AI and DataMind Audio. And these are two music businesses that are in the format of a plugin. They collaborate with artists and they create custom AI models for musicians, and then they can license their AI models for other people to use. So you buy the plugin, you pay extra based on, say, I don't know, you like Skrillex or whoever your favorite artist is. You can pay extra to use their AI model. It's not just freely given to everyone, and you as an artist get to decide as well how much would you like to license your AI model. And also the creativity is still very much focused on the creator who uses it. It's not a generative AI model. They can use your likeness. they still have to decide what the input is before they get the output. So it's a very specific and focused and a different solution to this whole challenge that we face of like, how do artists have agency over our data, and how do we decide how we consent and also keep the culture of the inspirational and the creatively inspiring aspects of using AI, because I think what's happening within the creative world in the context of AI is we're questioning all of the same fears, really, that we all are here sharing. And I think there's an urgency for art and science to come together, where scientists can help inform artists of the reality of things, deep scientific research, and the technologies are there. There's no reason why we can't build fair systems, remuneration, and hold corporations responsible. Like, we should have corporate social responsibility when there's been just decades of digital labor, and there shouldn't be only a few that benefit from it, right? Yeah. I was just in San Francisco. It was the first time I drove the Mission District in a long time, and it looked like Skid Row. I'm from LA, so it's really alarming. And so we do need to take things seriously and critically. And I am really grateful to be on this side of the world, to be able to have this kind of discourse, because it doesn't really exist in the US to this degree, I think.
And can you make that a little bit more specific? When you say this discourse doesn't exist in the US to the same degree, do you mean the role that public authorities could have and somehow intervene there, or more this conversation about, say, the nature of creativity and what it is that needs protecting, and whether there is a 2.0 form of creativity that we should maybe cherish and nurture? Or where do you see that, like, what for you is the core difference between the conversation that's being had in the US and the one that you hear here in Europe?
I think the fact that this is happening here, I don't see so much of in the US. At least I haven't been involved in that way. When I go back, just to give a little bit more insight, Newtone AI, one of the staff members, one of the head of Newtone is an ex-employee of OpenAI. And he left OpenAI after working there for 5 years because of the ethical reasons. And he shared a lot of his personal journey with me. And so it's really encouraging, and optimism is a choice. So I'm also trying to balance between being consistently overwhelmed and staying optimistic that there are these people who are equally traumatized as we all are, and trying to be constructive about our conditioned trauma. And I think I will say that as an American, it's taking me a really long time to heal my own societal conditioning from the US by living in Europe for a long time. And I appreciate that. I think in the EU, while there is no perfect place to live in the world, there's a stronger focus on human rights here, whereas the US has, at least in the corporate world, because the US is hypercapitalism, that, yes, capitalism exists everywhere, but there's a bit more of a perhaps social responsibility here. There's a bit a more balanced, perhaps, approach to social well-being that I appreciate. So I just hope that somehow we can inspire each other by all of the different ways, our strengths and weaknesses, like identify what those are, because it's not just one or the other. I think we really need a collaborative effort now more than ever for policy and change makers. Use us, artists and scientists and technologists, to test speculations. I think the fear that I have at the moment is that our policy and change makers who don't have enough of experiential knowledge make critical decisions based on speculations rather than actually tested experiences.
Right. All right. Well, thanks so much. Frederick Young, let me go to you. You're Executive Director of, here in Belgium, the Society of Dramatic Actors and Composers. So again, from a slightly different angle, of course, extremely closely involved. Many of your members, I think, will be grappling with the same kinds of issues here. So listening to this conversation, like, and then comparing that to the concerns that the members of your organization have, like what there are the key conversations that are happening and the key pain points, if you will, that people worry about.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the beginning of this sharing. La SACD and LASCAM are two other societies. La SACD is the oldest one in the world, 18th century, so we have some experience in managing copyrights, and I would prefer authors' rights. And I will try to resume and synthesize what is the main question for members. First, some facts. Big global tech companies did the most massive thief of human creation since today. It's not only a steal of individual properties, authors' rights, but to collective human patrimony. And so I'm quite, I feel quite strange when I see some people not far from here, a few meters from here, who seems totally unaware of this steal. And of course, we think this steal must be compensated. Second thing is we are facing a totally unfair competition between human creative works and commercial exploitation of synthetic products. Just think about what is the real price of one synthetic product made by OpenAI or Meta or Google, and the price offered to the market for this. This is not fair, and this unbalanced situation should be fixed very quickly. Third, I wrote a book on history of authors' rights, and I believe that this system, developed in Europe since the 18th century for most, is really the best one to absorb the evolution of technologies. We succeed, or father or mothers succeed in taking care of photography, cinema, radio, distance communication, until direct injection, and web platforms. And now we have a new technology coming in, which is the generative AI, and it can really fall under this system. I have no doubt of that when you see the history of authors' rights and copyrights. And we did create all the tools we need to do that. We have register of activities, we have license tools, we have collective management, we have organization to do that and to negotiate that. We have unwaivable right to remuneration, even if Netflix and Google doesn't like it. We have private copy schemes, reprography schemes. We have chronology of use. We have respect of moral rights. We have, and I think the droit de paternité and the maternité is crucial now because you speak about the credits. I share the same concern. We have remunerated public domain in some countries. We have protection of traditional patrimonium. All those tools are in the legislation, and we just have to apply them to the new situation. It's not so difficult, but what is difficult is to enforce it late after, because, of course, the big tech company are really using all their power, and economical and legal power, to avoid that. But we will do it, I'm sure of that, because this is how we did with the platforms, for example, in the 2019 directive a few years ago. And just to finish with an intuition I want to share with you today. You know, in Belgium, and I think in Europe, the COVID crisis helped us to push a better political support for an European statute of artist workers. It was clear that after the crisis and during the crisis, the politician was more open to discuss a statute for creators and performers, and they were ready to push an agenda on that, thanks to the European Parliament, for example, with the very good resolution made in 2023. My intuition is that our AI crisis, because we are in a crisis there, is a new opportunity to construct this EU Statute of Artists, which is not only a social protection system, but articulated construction of different protection and rights, among them authors' right and right to negotiate collectively. That's mainly the most important items we are discussing with our 150,000 members.
Yeah, excellent, super cool, Frederick. Let me ask you, you mentioned the big steal, right, as one way of thinking about what's going on. And I could imagine two different versions of the big steal, and I'd still be interested to know which of the two for you it is. There is one version of the big steal, which basically says the issue is, in general, that we now have technological systems that can produce, some people would say seemingly, some people would say for real, but artistic content that will be used instead of content produced by humans that generates displacement, that may be worsening working conditions. So we don't want basically this computer-generated content encroaching on the turf of what people do. And there's another version of the argument that says, oh, the key issue actually is that the rights of the people who have created the data, the content with which these models have been trained, have been disrespected. And if only there were a fair sharing of the spoils, if the companies that use these Gen AI tools, if they were to compensate the people who have created the content on which they were trained, we'd be fine. So would you say, and for your members, what's the balance between the problem being that there are tech tools that might replace or worsen the working conditions of humans right now doing this work, versus the key issue is compensation for the people who have done work in the past, which is basically the fodder for these technologies and what they produce now?
Well, I think I tried to say both, of course. First for the past, and but the past is the today creations, because it is clear now that major AI tech companies really needs fresh contents. They really try to get contents from everywhere, sometimes paying it, like with the Springer or the Le Monde agreements, sometimes stealing it, like Meta did with YouTube, millions of videos, as the New York Times demonstrate. So this is one thing, and it of course it has to be compensated. But in the same time, I said that the unfair competition of pushing on the market artificial products, synthetic products, against the human work is not something we can accept, because this is the unbalanced situation we have now. So, of course, we have a lot of creators, members, who are using tools, AI tools or other technological tools to create new works, but it's different to, they don't create artificial products. They are still creating human products with tools like a camera or a microphone or things we had before. So we have both problems to be tackled together.
All right. Hey, Hannes, let me ask you, after listening to the perspectives from the other side of the Atlantic, and now thinking back to the European context in which you're mostly engaged, to what degree do you feel that, for example, the experience that Alan recounted or the transatlantic differences that Project XO talked about, what are lessons that may be in there, but what are maybe also limitations in terms of what can be transferred to the European context from the American experience here when you hear this?
Oh, that's a very difficult question, but I can only break it down for us. I mean, first of all, I mean, Alan knows that, but I think it's important to say what the Writers Guilds did last year was in importance not only for their members, but basically for all workers in the industry, whether it's in the US, whether these are writers, directors, actors, technicians behind the camera, not only in the US, but also here in Europe and quite frankly, all over the world. You couldn't imagine how many calls and emails we got over the summer on the strike asking how are they doing, how can we help to support them. If those guys don't, make a deal with those very powerful companies, who on earth other unions, other societies, other collective professional associations can actually have a dialogue eye to eye with companies over the future of their work.
But do you see structural differences between the situation in the United States and in Europe that might make it easier or harder
Both
for people here to pull off the same thing?
Well, you know, we have let's say, a structural difference in regulation is, unfortunately for our colleagues in the US, it's pretty dead road at the moment for regulation with some exceptions. And we have an opportunity to shape regulation in a way that I would say we are privileged. It's still hard, and don't take me to be naive. I know how much millions and human resources are put in by the big companies, non-European companies, into lobbying. But we have still the opportunity, and we repeat it on many different fronts together with our partner organizations, whether they're collecting society, professional organizations, in EU regulation to bring in the voice of the workers and the creators. You know, yes, on Monday, I think, started the discussions on the code of practice on the implementation of the AI. And I know that many, many creators organizations, some of them are here in the room, they all participate. We have a network. We will be making, you know, our voice heard. It will be difficult, but we have a fighting chance. And I think what we heard this morning from the Member of Parliament is, even though they're still, even our good friends from the Social Democrats are running after, oh, don't stifle innovation, please. You know, this is not the right question. The question is whether we can have AI jobs. Even if they run after that myth, they still listen. They still know what you expressed, that, you know, there is a consideration of what creation do we want, what sector do we want, what kind of content do we want, and how do we want to shape that? And regulation, it is acknowledged that regulation plays a crucial role. And that's, I think, where we have the advantage. Where we have the disadvantage, and we can learn a lot, and I hope we are learning a lot, and my colleagues throughout the different member states are learning a lot from our US colleagues, is the collective power to build, how important it is, you know, not to rely only on regulation. It is only the collective power of unions in the workplace that can protect the workers. So, and in some instances, there have been barriers. Maybe just one example, and I close here. It's too much to be said, but I really, one difference is, Alan mentioned the work to hire, which, you know, has advantages, disadvantages. But the one advantage is it allowed the writers and other crafts to build a strong union movement.
Yes.
Whereas in Europe, most creators have been and still are independent contractors. And EU competition law has prohibited for those creative workers to actually come together in a union, to be represented by a union, and then to collectively bargain. We have tried many, many times together with sister organizations to engage European employers associations, whether they're producers, broadcasters, etc., to engage into promoting social dialogue and collective bargaining for those groups. And we have always met the resistance, said, oh, we would like to sit down with you, but actually there would be uncompetitive behavior, we cannot do that. Thankfully, only recently the European Commission has removed that barrier. But we are, you know, since when are you negotiating as work for hire? I mean, that's decades. Yeah. So for us, for many European unions, professional associations, also the relationship between collecting societies and unions, like Belgium, Frederick could say about, you know, how they cooperate with public broadcasters and so forth. Also, that is new to some extent. So actually, there is a lot we can learn from US unions, how to build the collective bargaining structure for essentially a freelance market, and where people, you know, every job is the next job. I mean, to build security, that's a huge challenge, and I think here we can learn a lot from Ellen and her colleagues.
Right. Thanks. Hannes, you mentioned the political and intellectual firepower that's also assembled here in the room. And I would like to take this opportunity also to hear a little bit from your perspectives. As we mentioned earlier, there seem to be really many angles to this problem. We didn't talk all that much about like the intricacies of copyright, for example. That's one thing, but of course there are also broader considerations. So I would invite you all to share your thoughts, questions to the panel, but also comments would very much be welcome. What we'll do is we'll take 3 at a time. We have 2 microphones there at the end of the room. If you do want to share something, please do us the favor and introduce yourselves if you have a particular professional association or the particular angle from which you come at this. You may give the word. Let's start back there. Yes.
Yes, hi there. My name is Alexander. Thank you already for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and the Competence Center for the Future of Work for organizing this interesting debate. I'm representing FEFPRO, which is the trade union association of professional football players, male and female. So we obviously also work on this topic of data technology innovation in our industrial sector. Now I've two specific, or a quick comment and I think a couple of questions. I think Johannes said something really important at the beginning, and that was basically the job of the unions is actually to listen to the members, right? And it was fantastic in that context to also hear from Portrait XO on basically what this experience was in and around using AI, what the touch points are with technology. We have that very much also with our members, basically. Just as an example, we're at the moment collecting in the professional football industry. In 2018, we collected around 300,000 data points per match per player. And just 4 years later, we started to collect at the World Cup in Qatar around 8 million data points per player per match through optical cameras under the stadium roof, so invasive or non-invasive technology. And that's basically tracking biomechanical movement data of the players. I think our challenges are slightly different in terms of we're collecting a lot of sensitive special categories data on health. The concerns are very much about future impact on recruitment, the training of algorithmic management, specifically on basically making these recruitment decisions in our sector. We're looking at challenges in around injury predictions, for example, also in the future. We're looking at commercial exploitation. So I think there are a lot of similarities in that sense. Now, two questions to Alan specifically. When you actually moved on to labor actions in your sector, we also saw that specifically our sister unions in the sports industry, also in the US, so the unions of the NBA players, NFL players, but also our member, the Major League Soccer Players Union, supported your actions. So maybe you can share a little bit about this coalition building also and the solidarity your workers, your unions experienced in this period of collective bargaining. And then the other question was very much in around, algorithmic management also, and how far, you were able also in these collective conversations actually to look into the engines basically, which make some of these decisions also. So yeah, that would be very interesting. Thank you.
All right, super cool. Also, thank you. And before you answer, Alan, let's see whether there are more interventions from the floor. But that's an other interesting example of how AI seems to seep into different corners of our lives where maybe many of us haven't quite realized that they're there yet. So before you answer, let me see, are there other interventions from the floor, other contributions from other sectors, maybe from the policymaking world? Can also ruminate on them some more. So if you have something that you want to ask or to contribute, do raise your hand. In the meantime, Ellen, solidarity elsewhere, support from other unions, sectors?
Yeah. It was such a crucial part of the strike. And just to give a little bit of background, in 2007, Writers Guild went on strike over internet, actually, the rise of the internet and who was going to have jurisdiction over writing on the internet. And, at the time, it was a little bit of a different labor environment, decades of decline in labor activity in the United States. And so that was a little bit of a more alone. We used to call ourselves, we're small but alone. And obviously, things have changed. I think the rise of, the Gen Z and sort of the growing popularity of the labor movement had a big impact. And when we went into negotiations and then our strike last year, we did a lot of work with our sister guilds within the entertainment industry because their support was critical. And then, you know, because our strike was so public, we were so lucky to have other unions reaching out to us to join our picket lines. And when you have a strike for 148 days, you know, there's just a lot of time for people to come in. Yeah. You know, people called it hot labor summer at the same time that writers were striking. And, you know, sometimes people see writers as, you know, white collar or rich, and we certainly do have affluent members. But the hotel workers in Los Angeles were also engaged in ongoing strikes, and we had a lot of solidarity actions. All the professional sports unions came out and supported us. You know, we worked with Johannes and our allies in the Federation of Scriptwriters in Europe to have an international day of action. Right. And obviously it was so important to our members who, you know, I think you come here and you talk about them as some example of power, but, you know, writers are maybe like the most self-doubting professionals I've ever met. And so, you know, they didn't enter, you know, a strike thinking, oh, we've got this. You know, they were scared and concerned. And it's just a matter of, you know, organizing and remembering, you know, their power, which the industry wants them to forget. That, you know, writing is the most incredible thing. I mean, to start with a blank page, you know, they had to find their power and realize that, you know, AI, while it may want to replace them, really can't. And one of my favorite picket signs from the strike was, you know, AI doesn't have childhood trauma. Which is the necessary ingredient for being a writer. And so, you know, it's just so important, and we've had to keep that going as our, you know, our brothers and sisters and siblings in IATSE and the crew unions went into negotiations this year, and it's just so critical. You know, our employers are allied, they bargain together, and they have this great corporate solidarity, and it's so important for unions to, you know, counter that. And then just on your second question, I'm not sure if I completely understood it, but, you know, we really didn't get into, I mean, we don't negotiate with the companies that are actually creating, you know, these AI platforms because they're not the traditional employers in the industry. And so, you know, when we were dealing with Sony and Disney and Netflix, you know, none of them have AI models. I mean, they don't, they all didn't want to talk about it last year, but they really weren't doing anything. And they're all confronted with the challenge of that these companies have taken their works. Yes. I mean, they've scraped Hulu and not just YouTube, they've taken it from everywhere. And so we're trying to work with them to say, well, you know, we shouldn't allow that to happen. We're allied here. And obviously there are, you know, a lot of lawsuits in the U.S. that will eventually deal with, you know, was it okay to just take this work? And so that remains, you know, an ongoing fight.
Yeah. Portrait, when you talked about your relationship and, you know, getting into this field of, you know, how does human creativity relate to these digital technologies, you know, you had a very clear personal dimension as well. You know, what do I do with these things? How does it relate? Now we're having a conversation about corporate juggernauts out there, right? Huge companies and the enormous asymmetry in power between potentially decentralized landscape of artists and creators, but also Hannes talked before about some smaller creative companies also, but then there's also like a few behemoths, be they sort of like more legacy, you know, creative companies. You mentioned, say, the Disneys and Netflixes of this world, but then also the large AI companies. How does that factor into this whole conversation for you? Is there a charge, like an emotional or political charge from an artist's perspective that has to do with the fact that we're dealing with not big, but very big money here? Or is for you primarily the axis where you say, well, you know, let's find a way of salvage, or maybe, you know, promote, augment creativity as we deal with these technologies, and whether it's like OpenAI or like a bunch of smaller AI companies in a way that's like a secondary consideration? How important is that aspect for you when you think about this?
I think that, oh, is this on? Okay. I think the ethics is something that is really critical that we need to consistently check in. And it's been a big question since the beginning when I was introduced to everything, of knowing in 2015 that this was going to be a huge issue, that we were going to need as many minds as possible to come together to try to figure out what are the new solutions going to look like. When we experienced Getty Images suing Stability AI, and now we've got Suno and Udio suing, being sued by the music industry. My hunch is that music labels will probably buy them, and then the question will be, are they going to make fair decisions based on adopting these new technologies, right? So the way I see it, all of these evolutionary ways of working with AI, there's nothing to stop it, right? So it's not yes or no AI, it's how AI, and we're gonna need to have more and more nuanced conversations. And so I just think we really need to come together as much as possible with very multidisciplinary teams of humans to bring very different perspectives and skills and figure out like what are our shared fears and what are our shared difficulties and challenges, and use all of our skills to produce different results and test things out. I think that is there's a real urgency for that. And I don't know how often have we as humans had speculations on things and then tested them out in the real world and felt very differently about them. So one of the big, I guess, differences that I feel now in 2024 versus, say, 2019, the last few years, while there are still very polarizing opinions about AI, there is a bit more richness to the dialogue based on the people who have been interrogating and investigating. And there are majority of artists that I know who are using AI are from kind of this fear-based approach. We're all actually quite scared of it, but rather than just saying no, let's investigate it and figure it out. Like nothing is black and white, you know? Technology, I'm quite agnostic towards it. And I think it's more about being critically engaged and be very informed about our opinions. And that's kind of the main urgency I really feel right now. So we just need to make very conscious decisions, I think, and be about collective intelligence. And Alexander Saunier, who's in the audience there, an amazing academic and artist, we're currently exploring big data versus small data. And I think AI is the most intimate reflection of humanity, right? And because we're trying to create simulations or augmented versions of ourselves through these large data sets, but there's so much of kind of stupidity that comes out of large data as well. And we've been focusing on this project that we're exploring at the moment, comparing like large LLMs to small data. And when you work with large language models, the tricky thing is that it can tell lies very compellingly, but it's very bad at like a lot of factual knowledge. You know, you have to like fact check a lot of the things. And Meta AI just released yesterday these new ways that now content creators can upload images and have AI to augment the backgrounds. So moving forward, telling what is true and what is not is going to become way more and more challenging. And one thing I forgot to highlight, the main difference I felt between the EU and US recently in the summer was when Meta AI, I saw a little notification on Instagram that mentioned I have until June 7th to opt out of generative AI. None of my US friends saw this.
Yeah.
And the opt-out process was so difficult. They didn't make it easy. Not only that, you had 3 options to choose from to opt out of your content being used in a generative AI model and also your personal information. I was accepted for being opted out of my content being used. I was denied my personal information being used because I couldn't prove that I could find any of my personal data in the generative AI model that I couldn't access because I'm in EU.
That's pretty scandalous in my book.
You know, all these details I wouldn't know unless, you know, I only discovered that from being here. And all of my American friends are like, what, that's...
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So. To be fair, do we have a microphone for Paul? And please, your name was mentioned already, but please still introduce yourself.
Paul Keller from Open Future. I'm going to speak later. Just to be fair, like that is true, but like also afterwards, like the data protection authorities actually shut this down. So the European legislation to some degree has teased in this way. If you look at, for example, like recently it was LinkedIn who opted everybody in or in the US, but in Europe, like they don't use the data, right? Like so part of that legislation that we have in this space actually works. I think Meta tried its way around and sort of like then punched on the nose. So
yeah, thanks for that point. I think the question of enforcement of some of these things is something that we'll also get back to in the second panel, because it's of course one thing to say we have laws on the books that do X, Y, Z, and then sometimes I feel that there is this frame of mind where we put a check mark behind the issues because we feel we've legislated on them and that's it. But then, of course, the question of implementing these things and enforcing them effectively and giving rights holders a realistic chance of getting the job done, that's, of course, still a different story, right? You know, the best law is not worth very much if we don't have good tools for implementation. I want to give you one more chance before we go off to the break. I still feel that there must be key issues, key aspects to this debate that we have missed so far. And if you feel the urge to say, yes, I see a hand back there, let's please hear about them. Yes, and please also introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi. Yeah. I'm Jacob. I'm from Euractiv. I just wondered if any of you, maybe particularly Ellen, is following all of the AI bills in California that has been signed recently, and if you think they're good, if you think they are missing something important, and whether there are some things there that you think like the EU should watch out for.
I don't know, Ellen. Are you into this stuff? I don't know if there were other. Yeah, Paul, you also have something you still want to add?
I'm just very curious, Ellen, on your remark about sort of like copyright not being in your tool set, right? Because it's a labor law, because sort of like the contractual arrangements that you have. Do you sometimes wish you could also work with copyright, or are you actually happy that you can sort of structure that as a labor issue?
Thanks.
Well, on the first question, you know, we supported the bill that the governor did sign that SAG-AFTRA had brought, because, you know, our colleagues at the Actors Guild have some very, you know, specific concerns and in some ways more ripe issues on the reproduction of their voice and likeness, because actors were being scanned, and they have, you know, who they are is how they make money. You know, their image and their rights and their likeness. And so they've been working, you know, on the federal and the state level to try and, you know, get additional legislation passed to protect, you know, actors. We were supportive of that. There was another AI bill that the governor, you know, vetoed that we didn't take a position on. And I don't think it being vetoed is a big deal, because it was a little bit vague in terms of, you know, saying AI has to be developed safely, and you know, so that'll be an ongoing conversation. And you know, for us, I mean, you know, we have a view that this is not a fair use exception, that what the, you know, and so that is being, you know, worked through lawsuits. We've also told Congress, like, you could just act on that, but the likelihood of that happening is very low because of gridlock. But you know, we continue to be active there, and we're active in the Copyright Office to to ensure that, here we have a little bit of a disagreement, but that, AI-generated works are not copyrightable because it is about human artistry. And then to answer the second question, it's very interesting. A lot of times we have, when we have member meetings, writers will bring up, we should have the copyright. And, in some ways, when we compare and contrast with our colleagues in Europe who have copyright, I think collective bargaining has served us pretty well over the last 100 years in terms of what writers have been able to negotiate for, including things that are derived from copyright. We have, separated rights where writers do maintain some of the copyright. But in terms of our ability to bargain collectively for minimum wages and for residual compensation, I think the system that we're in has almost worked better in some ways than having the copyright and not being able to bargain collectively.
All right, thanks. Before we round off, Frederick, I want to get back to you once more. A pretty strong conversation here in Brussels is about Europe's ambition to somehow safeguard its digital independence, digital sovereignty, right? That's a pretty strong discourse here. And we've been talking a lot across the Atlantic right now. And of course, the fact of the matter is that many of these large companies that engage in building the most powerful, most prominent large language models, other forms of generative AI are American companies. It's really an open question, but I genuinely wonder whether there is a connection between the conversation that happens here in Brussels about some form of digital sovereignty, if you will, and the conversation that we have here somehow, if not putting the genie back into the bottle, as you said, that's not going to happen, but somehow, rebalancing the scales between large companies and the rights and compensation of creative workers. Is there a transatlantic, these are American companies, that makes it harder for us to get done what we need to get done dimension, or is that a side issue? Is there a connection for you between these two stories?
Yes, a very strong one. And I think one of my major points is about competition, fair competition. And it is strange how sometimes it seems difficult for European authorities or national authorities to implement and make efficient the competition rules when they are really clear unfair competitions activities. So yes, I think we can believe, as many people, that a fair competition market will help not only to protect authors, creators, workers, but to help those who are not so big than those major global companies who want to create new jobs, who want to create new experiences and new models of creation in a market, in a cultural field where they can have a place, where they can develop and not be confronted with an unfair price, unfair proposal coming from global actors who are really taking billions of US dollars to take the market in Europe or in other countries. So yes, the link is very obvious.
All right, yeah, thank you very much. I want to leave it at that for now. We have coffee waiting for us outside. Let's take a half-hour break, and I look forward to reconvening at 11:45. Before we do that, however, let's give our 4 panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming. All right, welcome back, everybody. With an eye on the time, let's get started. Again, here's a second round of a few sort of like household announcements. The first one is, for any and all of you who are interested, when we finish at 13:15, there will be lunch outside. So I hope you haven't sort of like loaded up too much on the Brussels pastries so far, but there will be lunch waiting in the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and of course all of us would be delighted if you would like to hang around some more, have a bite to eat, but also continue the conversation then and there. The other two announcements, it was mentioned at the beginning, but maybe some of you joined us later. Axel Voss from the European People's Party, unfortunately, due to scheduling conflicts, could not join us in the end, which is, of course, really unfortunate. And also good for you to know that we'll have, at the very end of this second half of our event, we have Oliver Rötig from UNI Europa reflecting on what he will have heard here. And he has to leave also pretty much on time, which is a good whip behind my own timekeeping to make sure that we really finish at 13:15. Now, before I ask the panel on stage, introduce that to you, we're super glad that Paul Keller, who is the Policy Director of Open Future, has agreed to do a little stage setting for us here to root and anchor the debate. Paul, please.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So the idea is that I'll do a little bit stage setting for the more copyright-focused discussion. We had lots of mentions of copyright this morning without going into too much detail, although I think Brando also did quite a good job taking us through at least the considerations in the context of the AI Act. A little bit about myself. I'm Paul Keller. I'm Director of Policy at Open Future. We are an Amsterdam and Warsaw-based think tank who works generally on openness in the digital environment. I'm also president of the Comunia Association, and one of my colleagues is going to be in the panel in a bit. We approach this issue first and foremost because we care about the open internet, and we want to keep the internet open. And as many of you will have seen, like there's lots of challenge generative AI has posed to this idea of the open internet. We've seen platforms close in sort of response to this. We've seen like lots of exclusive deals that generally feel that this idea of an open information space that provides access to knowledge, free access to knowledge for each and everyone is under even more attack. Like it always has been under attack from like the huge concentrations of power, which have been mentioned in the last panel, like the platformization, but it seems like generative AI has just been like another wave of attack on that. And so that's our perspective, first and foremost, why we look at this issue. And in this context, we've been looking very closely at the discussions about generative AI and specifically the interaction with copyright law, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. We've also been working actively on sort of like the sort of provisions that ended up in the AI Act that Brando talked a little bit about. So these two twin things, the obligation to respect union copyright law or have policies to respect copyright law to be precise, and the transparency obligation. And we've published extensively on this, so you may find our work online. So what I want to do now is not so much promote our own perspectives on this, but like sort of try to summarize where we are in the discussion. So what is the sort of like, what is the relationship between copyright and generative AI training in the EU legal context? And the first thing already mentioned is sort of like the basis for this discussion in the EU is the Copyright Directive, which was passed in 2019 at the end of the, not the previous, but the mandate before. Huge discussions about topics like upload filters or press publishers' right, relatively little attention paid to the provisions that deal with text and data mining. But these text and data mining provisions turn out to be like maybe one of these rare moments where the legislator is actually, or has been in the end, ahead of technology. Because as it turns out, as generative AI bursts on the public scene with the emergence of Chat-GPT, the concept of TDM as defined in the directive is actually like a pretty good fit for the technological processes that are used to train these models. So we find ourselves with a new technology emerging and a set of regulatory tools, a regulatory approach to these problems at our disposal. We just don't need to run right after technology, but we have something to work with. The interesting thing about this is that it's actually a fairly balanced approach, right? Like it's novel in terms of copyright. It is an exception on the one hand side for research users, like a full exception. If something is legally accessible, researchers for the purpose of scientific research can use that to do text and data mining, and that includes training AI models on it. Secondly, there's a separate part for all other purposes, which includes commercial purposes, which includes like the types of models that we're seeing pushed by big tech, but like also smaller companies, European companies. Like it also allows this as a default, but says again, with the condition that it's trained on legally accessible information, so you can't just like take something from illegal sources. But the second condition is that unless there has been a clearly expressed opt-out from rights holders on this. So it strikes a balance between the interest in research and transparency and understanding technology, and gives rights holders actually tools to say, like, to be much more sort of like, to reserve their rights in the context for commercial applications or other types of applications, in which case they have the full power of copyright behind them, conditional on this opt-out taking place. This is important to some degree because it ensures, and like I think Brando said this, like this balance between innovation and sort of the protection of rights in a way that is novel. It, for example, also prevents something like another orphan works problem, where a lot of works out there on the internet are actually produced by people who do not actively manage their rights, and it's often very difficult to get permission to do something with them. And it turns it a little bit around and ensures that those people who care enough about their rights to reserve the rights, they can enter into negotiations while this rest stays available for innovators to work with. Now, there's a long discussion. So the AI sort of revolution or whatever it is happens, Chat-GPT comes, there's a long discussion about if TDM actually covers generative AI training, if it was the intent of the legislator at the time in 2019 to enable this technology with the TDM exceptions or not. And there's varied positions, and I think you can have like whatever you think about these two things. It's not that relevant anymore because the AI Act has been passed at the beginning of this year. And as Brando explained, the AI Act basically says, like the subsequent legislator says, we think the TDM exceptions provide the relevant legislative framework, and with the AI Act, we want to ensure that they are enforceable, that there's policies around it. So it basically takes the existing thing and puts a wrapper of sort of more enforceability around it with two things: the requirement to have policies in place, and very important, a transparency obligation, which would give rights holders, but also holders of another legitimate interest, the ability to actually understand if and how their data has been used in the training of AI models. So these are the two twin things that have been established by the AI Act. And as a result, we do have a lot of clarity. We actually have more clarity around this also since end of last week. End of last week in Hamburg, a lower court in Germany decided a case that was around the use of copyrighted material for AI training and found the provisions of the TDM exception or the TDM exceptions applicable to this case. So they used this part of the law in order to address the question if copyright infringement took place or not. In this case, they found no copyright infringement because they found that Lion was covered by the research exception. Secondly, they also, like, again, stated this point about that the discussion if the TDM exception was actually applicable or not is essentially moot because, like, the subsequent legislator has said it does apply. So we have a tool set in place, as Brando explained this morning, and we need to make this work. That is the requirement for AI model providers to put in place a policy to respect EU copyright law, and specifically the opt-out mechanism contained in Article 4 of the Copyright Directive, and the transparency requirement to produce a sufficiently detailed summary. It's currently, both of them are under discussion how these look like. The AI Act actually sets a framework with this codes of practice process where it is up to the AI model providers, essentially in a large, complicated, multi-stakeholder process that started this week, Monday, that some of you may have followed, to come up with actual implementations of these two rules. The big challenges are there is we need clearly more standardization in the terms of opt-outs. It needs to be easier for rights holders to express their sort of like opt-outs if they wish in a machine-readable way that is then also easily interpretable by the AI model developers on the one side. And the other question, and I think Brando also talked about that a lot, like what on earth is a sufficiently detailed summary? We actually, to pitch our own work, have published a template that says it's quite a detailed thing. But there obviously like is a huge discussion going on there that ranges from people who want to see everything on the one hand side to people who want to probably disclose as little as possible on the other hand. And this is a very interesting process that will develop over the next 9 months. But sort of unless we see a complete breakdown of process, we should have some more certainty about this in about 9 months' time because that's the time frame that the AI Act actually sets for this. So my point would be that it is actually like these two things are things that need to be worked out at the moment. Both are challenging to get them right, but we actually have processes and we have the overall framework in place. So this is a discussion about technical implementation of certain things. The one thing that is important here, and that's a longer-term challenge, is that neither the Copyright Directive nor the AI Act say anything about remuneration of creators. Like the assumption built in the Copyright Directive, I would say, is probably, okay, you reserve your rights as rights holders, and then you have a negotiation position, and then out of free negotiations between players comes some situation where rights holders find themselves fairly remunerated. If this will work is a big question. I think we heard a lot of people here also question, like there's huge imbalances in this place. Brando expressed also that he thinks like this might work for maybe some of the big corporate rights holders, but that this will be a very tall lift for individuals or sort of for collecting societies to achieve. So I would argue that the most interesting thing to think about is once we have the practical implementation in place, what needs to be done about enabling remuneration if this sort of fair remuneration system doesn't emerge out of like just the technical things in place? What are our ideas how we can ensure that the value is not only captured on the side of the big AI companies, but that parts of that value is transferred to individual creators, to other types of rights holders, and maybe what's interesting here, also to others contributing to the building of these AI systems, right? They are not only built on information provided by professional creators, a lot of it comes from the internet at large, a lot of it comes from sources of knowledge that are held by cultural heritage institutions that put huge amounts of effort into maintaining these collections. So how can we build sustainable information ecosystems in the face of this new technology? And I'm looking forward to the panel to discuss these questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. That's super helpful in terms of setting the stage. Those of you who are not super familiar with the intricacies of copyright legislation, court proceedings, and the like, I think this was, like as apt a summary as we could have hoped for. Indeed, that's one set of considerations. Towards the end, you already alluded to the fact that there are larger power plays going on here as well. You mentioned the imbalances again between small players, large players, and there are other considerations. And I do indeed look forward to discussing those now with my second stellar panel of the day, which features Alexandra Gese, who is a member of the European Parliament for the Greens, Matthias Hornschuh von der Initiative Urheberrecht, or the Authors' Rights Initiative from Germany, Teresa Nobre, who's legal director at Comunia, Paul, you already alluded to that, and Alex Zaliba, who is a member of the European Parliament for the Socialists and Democrats. Please join me on the stage and give them a round of applause. Alexandra, let me start with you again, and again, purely due to the fact that we have you alphabetically listed here first in order. You, of course, have been involved in a whole range of different conversations here in Brussels about what do we as Europeans, what do you as a member of a European Parliament do with these digital technologies and AI? Copyright is one dimension that's clearly present there, but I also wonder to what degree the conversation that we've had and what you just heard Paul say maybe also links to other broader issues that you are currently working on, focused on, that you feel have to be part of the conversation when we think about, okay, what is the Brussels to-do list? What are the things? What is the ball that we need to keep our eye on when we think about and discuss these issues?
Yes, okay. Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity to broaden up a little bit the conversation, because I think the copyright issue and what you mentioned, and thanks for the stage setting, really shows that there's a broader issue, that there are broader issues at stake, and that make it so difficult. To start with what also Paul started with, the issue of openness. I mean, the internet in the beginning was this promise of openness, of networking, of access to knowledge. And then we watched it sort of closing around a handful of companies, a handful of platforms, which are exactly the same that control artificial intelligence. It's not that it's a big host of different players. It's the same 5, 6 companies, 7, 8 if you take the Chinese companies. And so we see this closeness, really the companies closing, the platforms closing and around proprietary models. And I think one thing we could and we should do, and I mean, in Europe, we are not on the winning side. Clearly, we're clearly losing out. We're completely losing power. We're not investing in digital. We are watching autocracies, and that I'm not speaking of the US, just to make that clear, but autocracies really using and investing in digital technologies in a very impressive way. Look at China, for example, and democracies are not. I mean, in the US, it's private capital. In other countries, there's very little public investment. And so what I would like to see is not having creatives in Europe going against big tech in the US, because I know how this is going to end, frankly. But I would like to see Europe building up their own capacities, their own digital technologies, infrastructure, business models, maybe companies that can compete. And then you have a completely different bargaining situation if you have an alternative to these companies, because I mean, good luck negotiating with Google or Microsoft on these things. But if there are 4 or 5 different companies who could render the same service, for example, I think then it becomes much more interesting. And this is something where we are not alone. We could team up with countries like India or Brazil, who are very concerned about their digital sovereignty and are trying to reopen up with open systems, with open source, open protocols. Taiwan has been very successful doing that. So this is, I know this is a little bit a higher level, it's a vision, but I think this is where Europe could go. Maybe second consideration might be obvious to you, but not everybody thinks about it. They have the technology, but we have the cultural heritage, and a lot of the creativity comes from Europe. I mean, you mentioned cultural heritage institutions. I think the density we have in Europe in terms of cultural heritage and museums, and the capacity also to use them is probably unequaled in the world. And so remembering that we have the content, we have what they want, and we should not just give it away without having a strong bargaining power, I think that is super important. And there the question is, how can European institutions and legislation support that? Because there is an asymmetry of power in general between these big companies, these huge enterprises, and European cultural heritage institutions, publishers, and obviously the people that are creatives. And there's an asymmetry of power against some big companies and the individuals. So the question is, how can we support collective bargaining here? What can we do to support especially the smaller players that need that? And I think these are really the bigger questions that we need to ask, really asymmetry of power, and what can we do in terms of European offers, companies, technologies, and so on, and how can we support that?
Okay, let me push you for a second on that particular point, and basically just give the question back to you. What can we as Europeans do? When you say maybe there is a need for strengthening European ecosystem, there's a conversation in this city about maybe the need to build a Euro stack. That's something that people have talked about. Where do you see the specific mission maybe that a European Parliament, a European Commission, maybe the Council, these institutions working together might have to say this is also part of an agenda of, basically reclaiming the digital stack in order to put it more directly at the service of the public? What could potential steps be?
Well, we have a designate vice president of the European Commission who is called the Vice President for Tech Sovereignty. And when we speak about tech sovereignty, I think what we do mean is digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure, the real technology, but it's also how do we make sure we have access, we can design and understand critical technologies, digital technologies. So this is what the Commission should be doing, giving a definition, looking into that. This is what Parliament is starting to work on. At least in my committee, we are proposing ideas to look into that. But that's only the technical model. But the really interesting question is, what does that mean for example, our cultural sector? What does that mean for our education sector? When there was COVID and the schools had to shut down, and I come from a country where schools were shut down basically for a year. everybody, many schools used Microsoft tools, which have serious issues in terms of security, in terms of privacy, of data of minors. And that was really a big issue. And very few countries had alternative models that were safe for our kids. So I think on the one hand, we should spell out the Commission and the Parliament together what this technical sovereignty means in terms of really physical infrastructure, because there we are falling behind as well, in terms of better business models, where not all the money goes to the biggest players, but where the enhanced productivity and the added value really goes to the people who participate in the whole process and possibly who pay their taxes in Europe. But we should also spell out what does that mean for the different sectors and very actively support all initiatives that support those sectors. So supporting small software projects, also not software-linked projects on how to make good models available for education, for culture, for the whole health sector, where we don't want to give away our data. I mean, this data is what we have created. It's extremely precious, it's extremely valuable, and we want to use it in a way that it benefits our citizens and the people who created it. Yeah. I think that's the task. So spell it out on both levels, the business models, the technical infrastructure, but it should not be a too technical discourse. I would love to see museum directors speak about how they could make their works available, but in the way that remuneration stays with the people who work on maintaining this wonderful artwork we have in Europe, just to make an example.
Yeah, thanks, Alexandra. Matthias, let me turn to you. And maybe you can both share your take on what you've been hearing now, but also, of course, what you heard earlier this morning on this. And maybe also for the benefit of our audience, just give us a sentence or two about what the Initiative Urheberrecht, what that is all about, and who you represent when you sit here today.
Okay, thanks. I'm a composer and musicologist. I'm not a law scholar, and I'm representing Initiative Urheberrecht, which is an umbrella organization of associations and unions in the field of authors' rights. And we're representing 45 organizations and round about 150,000 people. And I wrote down what I brought because I want to stay in the 5-minute realm. While AI technology has obvious economies of scale, people and cultures do not. We don't scale, we are slow, or in other words, we need the time it takes. The time it takes to find the right questions and perspectives, to reflect, to understand, to discuss, and finally to adapt. So, the first thing I would do, and this is what you asked me to tell you, the first thing I would do is to hit the brake. Something we don't have, by the way. Not to stop the technology, but to provide us with the time needed for the necessary cultural transformation and the indispensable joint opinion-forming process. Something else we don't have or do, by the way. Quite obviously, this can't be done on national or European level. My IA break needs to be a global one due to two main reasons. One, our laws for data protection, informational self-determination, personal rights, competition law, market regulation, copyright, and many more are territorially limited, while two, the corporations that are forcing generative AI into our markets and societies are American and Asian companies. Our law does not apply there. Global developments require global answers. Convergent developments must be met with convergent tools, answers and tools that no one has come up with yet. One of the deeply disturbing realizations when looking back at 3 decades of digital regulation is our collective inability to tackle patterns and repetitions in digital disruption. We repeat the same mistakes we have already made over and over again. We are still a long way from a functioning allocation of liability for online platforms and have only just scratched the surface of the whole AI topic, especially when it comes to cultural and media content. We always allow the normative power of the factual to dictate our path. And it is always the same companies that set these rules. We don't even scare them with our fines. For them, it's an investment, it's priced in. Why are we so easy to manipulate? Why do we let corporations impose their rules on us? Corporations that employ evangelists to sell us their sweatshop practices as democratization and liberation. Maybe it's about fear and hope, curiosity and euphoria, the wish to be connected and to adapt rather than being left behind. So it's all about narratives. That is why the existence of evangelists is so important. Contemporary Western societies tend to lose their core narratives. We abandon the narratives that create identity, and in doing so we abandon ourselves as societies. AI touches on each and every single one of these aspects. An AI break, a moratorium, would give us a much needed chance of redefining who we are, what it is that connects us, what we want and what we will not accept. I know, it sounds naive, and maybe it is. But haven't you noticed how we tend to lose the occasions, the rituals and practices for in-depth communication? AI is not the cause, but an accelerant for existing problems. You asked, what would it take to make that happen? Seriously, I don't know. But I would most certainly start with a mindset that allows for dialogue, for interaction. We need to listen much more and lecture less. We need to distinguish between factual and relationship levels. Argue on the matter and don't think it's enough to belittle the other one. We might find out that not everyone being critical on AI is a Luddite, and that someone who is an enthusiast might actually have detected a solution for an existing problem. Well, you never know. However, I do believe that AI technology poses a major threat to human and civil rights, to democracies and to cultural diversity. I come back to the starting point and end with a warning. We must not allow the gap between technological progress and democratic control to become too wide. Back in January, the European Parliament adopted a report on music streaming by a large majority. It states, "A dysfunctional market endangers cultural diversity. Generative AI is amplifying these processes dramatically. Endangering diversity is a threat to European identity, and Europe, however, is founded on unity in diversity." So this is about our identity. Now let me get that straight. The European Parliament says, if creative work is threatened, our identity is threatened. We should begin to act in accordance with this conclusion.
All right. Speaking of evangelists, that sounds like quite the tall order that you give us there. So if you had, so we have two members of the European Parliament sitting right here next with us. If you had one thing that you would take from that you would want to throw immediately on their to-do list, what would it be?
We need to make sure that knowledge work on a professional level will be incentivized in our future. We're giving that up.
Okay. What can they do about that?
Copyright is one solution, but not the only one, because it's not just about copyright. It's about personal rights as well, which is why I'm speaking about identity. Yeah, we have problems ahead, or we're facing problems that we don't even have an idea of how to solve them. And I think the reason for me to be so clear on my wish of going into a deep dialogue is that we need to think about the speech we use, the words, the terms we use, starting with intelligence and emotion, things like that, and co-creativity. It's so hard for us to talk about the same things with the same when we are thinking about different aspects or different worlds using the same words.
Right. So what I hear you saying is, don't only think about this in terms of AI workers and how do we get that right, but think about digital technologies and what makes our societies tick as societies that function, that are cohesive, that allow humans to flourish, and let that be the debate rather than do we lose jobs or not.
I think that we're talking about identity and cultural workers and knowledge workers being the heart of the society in a way that beats and refreshes our identity over the time.
All right. Okay. Thanks very much. Teresa, let me go to you. You are, as I said, the legal director of the Communia Association. I'm not sure Paul mentioned Communia already. I don't know whether everybody here in the room is familiar with Communia. So before you share your perspective on this with us, maybe you can take, again, a sentence or two to tell us what Communia is and what it does.
Thank you. So we are a civil society organization, mostly focusing on the issues of access to knowledge and defending, let's say, the public domain-related interests in accessing knowledge, knowledge that is protected by copyright. So our focus is very much on copyright issues. We have been deeply involved on copyright reforms for the past decade, and right now we are looking forward to new challenges that copyright law, how to address new challenges that copyright law still poses to users in general, and most particularly to public interest institutions such as educational establishments in their relationships with big tech and big publishers, and other concerns that have this other perspective, that is the public interest perspective and users' rights considerations in mind.
All right, and having heard the different kinds of arguments this morning about what the real issues are, where maybe the pain is, where we need to push, whether there is room for legislators to intervene here because we haven't quite gotten the job done, or whether it's mostly a question of now getting the enforcement right of the rules that are on the books, or maybe we need action, say, from unions, right? You know, something that's a little bit outside of the scope of what legislators do. Do you see key points in this whole debate about generative AI and creative work where there is still a job to be done such that we get that right? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, of course, on the area of copyright and AI, there's still a lot to get it right. But I also feel, as many others have mentioned before, that the discussion should also move beyond copyright and what the copyright framework can do for creators and also for society in general. I think some of the previous speakers already mentioned some of those tools. So we are dealing with business models that are extractive. We are dealing with market concentration. We are dealing with abusive practices on a wide range of business models, not only generative AI business models. So definitely there's some thought to be put there in what can other fields of law and other regulatory frameworks do in this discussion. So think about, as Frederick mentioned, anti-competitive practices and what competition laws can do, antitrust laws, but also labor laws, as you just mentioned, and as the colleague from the US mentioned, that has been the main tool to deal with these issues. But perhaps also about tax law and taxation of big tech and generative AI business models. But since I'm the copyright expert, let me just focus on the copyright part of the discussion. And I think in order to get copyright and AI right, I would say we need a break, but a different kind of break from the one that Matthias, not that I don't support what you said, Matthias, but I think we need to somehow in Europe to pause the discussions around the input phase of generative AI. So I think we have spent a lot of time already discussing whether TDM is part of, is involved in the training stage of generative AI. And as Paul mentioned, the AI Act provides kind of a final answer. Doesn't need to be final, but for now, from the EU legislator on what concerns the training stage of the AI models. So I think we should move and let, for instance, courts decide, because I think there's still a lot of legal interpretation to be made on the different stages and on the different copyright questions that the different stages of the AI life cycle entail. But certainly, I mean, we had the District Court of Hamburg issuing the first decision in Europe that confirms that reproduction under the TDM exception is what is involved in the training stage. So I would say, let's pause that discussion and let's focus on what needs to be done to ensure that creators have agency. As a previous speaker mentioned, have agency to say no to commercial AI training if that's their wish. And as Paul mentioned, we have a code of practice plenary that just started that will focus on getting some of those questions right in terms of transparency, in terms of detailing what a summary of the training data should look like, but also in terms of detailing what a copyright compliance policy should look like. Beyond that, there's the issue that Paul mentioned of standardizing outputs, and I think that's going to be extremely important to provide legal certainty to all parties involved. Yeah. But I have more, of course. I mean, this is the very first next step, but then we have all the other stages of the AI lifecycle, namely the output stage. And I don't think the copyright exceptions, it's not clear at this point if the copyright exceptions cover all of those stages. There's also the issue of remuneration that was mentioned. There's the issue of AI liability. There's an AI Liability Act that may also allow to rebalance some of these power dynamics, but also take into account other considerations, such as users' rights considerations. So users have not been listened into these discussions at all. And as Paul mentioned, and others have already mentioned as well, this is not just about extracting the value of content produced by professional creators. We have user creativity, we have collections of cultural heritage institutions that are being extracted as well, that are also losing visibility and therefore value. So I think there is some thought to be put there. And then, I mean, liability, for instance, is another issue or another aspect that, for sure, users' rights considerations also need to be taken into account. And I'll stop for now. I mean, I could
All right.
give you more.
Thanks so much. Alex, you're one of the people who is in the fortunate or unfortunate position to have to listen to all this, and then people are like, okay, do something with it. You know, get this right for European citizens. Can you share from your perspective, you know, this whole pretty convoluted cluster of different issues that have to do with copyright and beyond, different kinds of technologies, transatlantic things, workers, companies, American companies. This is a, I don't know, 5, 6, 7-dimensional issue that you're dealing with here. What does it translate into for you?
It's not a simple question to answer, ultimately, and I totally agree with the previous speakers. The AI Act is not the silver bullet to solve all the issues when it comes to content creators and the challenges that we are facing. This is a problem which has many different phases, from remuneration issues to taxation issues to competition issues and also to copyright issues. And maybe I am a little bit in disagreement with the line of thought of Matthias on the issue of pausing down on legislation right now and focusing on a discussion. I think that I think it's the right time right now to push forward, and creators, together with us as legislators, we should push forward when it comes to the interpretation of copyright, but also how the AI Act is filling in the gaps. We had, as Paul has rightly mentioned in his introductory remarks, we had very interesting core developments lately, the interpretation in the German courts, but also what has started to happen this week with the codes of practice, and I believe the important role that creators have in this very delicate process. I think that the starting point from this discussion is that art and technology have always been interrelated. And today, this connection is more important than ever. Innovation would be severely hampered without a robust intellectual property protection. And the rapid ascent when it comes to new digital technologies and also the increase of generative AI systems has also placed another significant strain when it comes to creative workers and also artists. And how to get creative AI right. This will be definitely discussed during the month of of November during the commissioners' hearings. When it comes to digital, the biggest challenge that we are having, and Alexandra is definitely also having it in her group, is a big challenge, and this is also very relevant in this discussion, of how tech initiatives have been spread around 15 different commissioners. So the process when it comes to overseeing what is going on when it comes to new ambitions, but also how, and this is the most challenging part that we are going to have in this legislature, how are we going to enforce what we have fought for during the previous legislature? I think this is going to be the trickiest part, to see exactly how this will be working. But when it comes to copyright AI, protection of creators, I think that there are two commissioners who will have very specific responsibility. Commissioner Verkoinen, who in her mission letter would be responsible for considering further improvement when it comes to the copyright framework and addressing the new challenges raised by the market and also by technological developments, and also the Maltese Commissioner Glenn McAuliffe, who should be working very closely with her when it comes to development of an AI strategy for culture and also creative industries. And I think it will be a very important opportunity, and we will be doing it as an S&D political group, to ask very specific questions to these commissioners on how they will be functioning in accordance to the mission letters given to them by the Commission President, and also what their vision is when it comes to having this development of an AI strategy which works not against creators, but works also for cultural and creative industries. Because ultimately, if we kill culture and creative industries, we are a dead society here in Europe.
Yeah.
So this should always remain our priority. Going back also to your question, I also want to clarify that we don't see an immediate need to reopen the copyright acquis. I think it's a black box, a Pandora's box, and we already have a number of instruments that we can use, for example, the TDM exception, which allows right holders also to opt out. Of course, implementation needs to be improved, because right now we are trying to be creative when it comes to this TDM exception and to the copyright infrastructure that we have. And here we are hoping that the AI Act can help us in this process. And during the negotiations on the AI Act, the European Parliament, I believe, and I remember, took a very proactive approach when it comes to copyright issues and how these should be respected, and the obligations of AI developers to publicly make a sufficient detailed summary of the content used for training the general purpose AI, and also of data protection under different IP rights. And the question of how to enforce the AI Act properly, and this will definitely be included in the summary. And as we know, as I said, this week we started with the drafting of the General Purpose AI Code of Practice, and from those talks it will definitely depend the future of right holders and how they can exercise their rights and how to protect their works and how the knowledge basically is used. And the new code of conduct resulting in this process has a potential to ensure that ambitious rules are applied to AI models which pose systemic risks to protected creators. And therefore it is important that the creative workers play their role, as I said, in the code of conduct process and other work to implement better the AI Act. Therefore, it is not the right time to pause when it comes to having this interaction between content creators, legislators, and also the 9-month time limit that we have when it comes to this process, which is very tricky in the first place. Therefore, we need to use every day, every hour, every week, every month of this process to be sure, because these codes of conduct play a very crucial role when it comes to protecting the rights of creators. But again, there are also a number of challenges. For example, when it comes to remuneration, I think that there we are having a legal loophole. And I don't think that copyright or the AI Act is the solution when it comes to remuneration. And therefore, if you would ask me, what is your free policy wish during this legislation to push forward, instead of trying to reopen the copyright directive, instead of trying to make the AI Act more clear? Because there I think that the European Parliament, during all the negotiations on the AI Act, tried to make this link between copyright and AI, and also to, as was already pointed out, maybe by coincidence or by foresight, when the European Parliament was pushing forward the negotiations with the Commission, with the Council on the Copyright Act, maybe we didn't have these challenges when it comes to challenges that are being faced by creators. But still, there is something which is tangible, which we can use under the copyright. But at the same time, I think that when it comes to remuneration, we have a vacuum, and there to continue to encourage, to continue to create an ecosystem which works for content creators. In Europe, I think that when it comes to remuneration, we have a blank page and we need to fill it in. Therefore, I think that this should be a priority for this legislature when it comes to safeguarding creators' rights. And also, I think that another wish list that I have would be also for wider distribution and online availability when it comes to European works across borders, while at the same time respecting the rights of creators and also allowing for fair and proportionate remuneration. And last but not least, I would also like that there is more clarification of the liability of big tech firms using generative AI system for unlicensed use of copyright content. So these are the three priorities that I wish to see.
All right. Okay. We'll check back in towards the end of the mandate to see where we've gotten with all of this. Let me also tell everybody that Alex has to leave a little earlier. So if at some point you see him standing up and leaving on a queue while we're all still seated here, don't worry, there's nothing untoward or weird going on. He just have other appointments. Yeah, thanks so much for that. Alexander, we've heard from Matthias, for example, that he's much in favor of broadening the debate, right? So that we go beyond seeing this simply in terms of workers here, companies there. You talked about issues like creativity, the meaning of this, European cultural heritage. Traditionally, the EU toolbox in terms of what can be achieved has been relatively limited. Regulation has been, our go-to tool, because the EU is obviously not a national legislature. EU budgets have been compared to what individual countries can do, relatively constrained. So to what degree do you feel, as somebody who's deeply involved in the policy progress, that here in Brussels, we have the tools available to you as a member of the European Parliament, but also together with the other institutions, that we have the tools that we need to put the society back behind the steering wheel of this? Or is there, as it were, some kind of structural handicap that there are things that we would want to do as Europe, as citizens of the European Union, but somehow the way that we've divvied up the different competences and the ability to act politically hampers us from getting the job done in the way they would really want to?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's not a problem of competences, even if the way that competences are spread in the new Commission is really a very new challenge, I think, for Parliament and for single MEPs, because keeping up with all these commissioners tackling specific aspects of the same big issue, I think that is challenging. But the big challenge we have is the power of these tech companies, the power they have in terms of lobbying and speaking to the Commission and speaking to Parliament. I worked on the Digital Services Act, and the kind of lobbying I've seen there, really, I think it has been compared to the tobacco industry, but I think it's worse, frankly. Only in terms of numbers, it's more than it's more than the gas and oil industry. And in terms of methods, it was really incredible. I mean, all these making money flow to universities all over Europe, all over the world. Actually, just finding an independent expert is something that takes my team 2 days. So we can't do that for every hearing or for every study we want to do. They set up a fake association of small and medium enterprises that specifically attacked me and my party with press releases and sent out emails to all MEPs. And then we sort of did some research with the journalists, and we figured out that the enterprises that were supposed to be members of this association didn't know anything about it. They were like bakeries somewhere in rural Germany said, well, I've never heard of these people. I know what Google is because of Google search, and this thing was Google funded. So I think this is the kind of challenge, this enormous power, and the fact that they have access. They fund basically all the think tanks that are relevant here in Brussels. There's big tech money in there. They have very easy access to Commission at all levels. So I think it's not so much a structural issue, but it's really a power issue to go against that. But I mean, we did achieve a lot in the Digital Service Act, the AI Act. So in spite of the lobbying, I think we did a lot. I mean, we're the first continent that is seriously legislating all these business models, technologies. We're doing it, So I don't want to discourage you, but that's the structural issue. I think a second point that is important that Alex made, and thank you for doing that, tell us what exactly you want us to do. I don't think we have the time to pause. And I totally agree with broadening the conversation, and that's what I did. It's a power asymmetry, it's opening, being open or closed, teaming up with other continents. So I think it's important to open up. But we don't have all the time because they are moving fast, but really, really fast. If you think about, we did the AI Act, and then from one day or other there was Chat-GPT, and everybody was listening. And when you see how this is proceeding at light speed, we don't have the time to pause that much. Yeah. So coming up with ideas, brainstorming in your industry, what are the 2-3 remuneration models you could imagine and that you want us to fight for? I think that's a good idea to look forward. I mean, this technology is there. It's not going to go away, even if we would want it to do, to go away in some areas. But we need to act really fast, so we need your ideas. And I think we don't need to think only in terms of what can we do to defend our rights against 2-3 companies, but what can we do ourselves in Europe? What are the kind of business models, what we can imagine, what kind of technology do we need to do this? Build a narrative around it, and we fight for it. That's what we're looking for. In terms of instruments, we do have the instruments. I mean, we're going to have a VP for tech sovereignty. We have a multi-annual financial framework coming up. So for the non-Brussels insiders, it's the 7-year budget of the European Union, where you could put money on policy lines. Might not be that much money, but you can put some public money to leverage private investment. And I'm sure there are so many investors out there that would be super interested in financing European Museum, the Europe creativity industry. We have great talent, we have great startups. It's just that we don't have a convincing strategy, that we don't stand up and say as Europeans, we want to be sovereign in digital terms, but that doesn't mean closing up. It doesn't mean autarky or protectionism or closing down. It means opening up and giving us a chance. So we need a common strategy, and we need your ideas, what your sector needs within that strategy. And I think you can play a really, really important role in building a good narrative. Yeah. And a third point, I think when we speak about, we now have to figure out this codes of practice, where I think big tech will be quite influential. So this is something you really need to look at what's happening there and make a big noise about it. What, in my experience, is it's very, very hard, whatever we decide, to really enforce it. I worked a lot on hate speech and illegal content. I was on a panel yesterday with the consumer associations, and what everybody is saying, breach of legislation is the rule and compliance is the exception. And we look at the instances where we manage to enforce things, but there's so much that is not enforced that we don't even know about. You know, like you don't know when your work is being used by generative AI. This is the asymmetry of knowledge. That's the problem we have. So whatever we decide, let's think about how to enforce this in a really powerful way. So let's not think only about legislation, but really on how to enforce whatever we decide. So focus on what are the really important points, and not, you know, the third comma at the fourth paragraph, but what is it what we really want to achieve, and then look at what the enforcement could look like in order to be really powerful.
All right. I heard an invitation there that I'm just going to throw out there, and then you get a moment to think about this, from Alexandra, and you'll also have to listen to this. Concrete ideas. You mentioned specifically remuneration. Okay, so if that is the issue, what could that look like, right? So I'm sure, so we'll get to you in a second. Before we do that, if there are more people who have thoughts about this, so what are we actually talking about? What could that look like? Is it going to be some kind of text that goes to associations, something that's on an individual basis, whatever? We want to hear it, and we want to feed these guys, right? Before that, however, Matthias, you said, I want to slam the brakes on some of this stuff. You got some pushback. I don't know whether you wanted to slam exactly the brakes that Alex and Alexandra were talking about. So maybe you can just sort of like come back on that point for a second, what you have in mind, and indeed whether you think that there is a reasonable chance of doing that, and if not, why not. And when we've heard him, then we want to hear your remuneration and other proposals.
Yeah, there's a remark I have to make. We had a brief, every one of us, and it reads like, imagine you had one free policy wish. This is what I did. This is not, it has not been a proposal. I mean, I hope you got it like that. It's not been a proposal. I know we won't do a break, and we can't. But let's imagine how it were if we were able to go into a deep talk about the things that that we have to care about because it's about our identity and about our ability to compete in the future. And if you ask for wishes for policy making, which is another thing, of course we have to talk about remuneration, and we have to talk about personal rights, which aren't covered right now, and it's way broader than copyright, because personal rights of every citizen of the European Union are at stake. So we need new instruments, and we don't have that problems covered right now. And even I don't like the idea of going back to the DSM directive. But seriously, we have to get rid of this TDM exception, because it's not working. It's not working for us, and and everyone tells us it's about us. It isn't. Because scraping and training started 10 years before the DSM directive was actually there. They did everything they wanted before we had this regulation. And right now, as of summer 2021, we have this regulation, and they don't care about our opt-out. I mean, we can prove that they don't. Yeah, what should we do about an opt-out that's not functioning in the market, and what can we do about it?
All right, let's collect some ideas. So I saw one over there, but also if there are other hands, so I see one over there, one over there. All right, okay, yes, and please remember to introduce yourself.
Thanks. My name is Nick Yule. I'm from the Association of European Performers Organisations, representing actors and musicians. Genuinely, thank you for the best panel on AI I've ever seen, to all the participants. It's been fantastic. So a question to Alexandra and to Alex, based on a comment from Matthias. Matthias has pointed out the author's streaming report on cultural diversity, which came from the Parliament by Ibn del Garcia Blanco. This was a fantastic report, which made a number of recommendations for the Commission to do various things, which I won't go into. Now, the Commission's had 1 year to react to those requests or demands from the Parliament, and the Commission's ignored them. So now we have some fantastic work done by the Parliament, which has been completely ignored. Now, I'm concerned. I love your enthusiasm for what you're doing in AI, But if you're going to talk about remuneration, you have to solve the problems that have already been identified and build on them. So my question and my proposal would be, what can you do to enforce the Commission to react to that report? And my solution would be, and I agree with Alex here that opening up a new legislation is probably too complicated, but my suggestion would be that there is a roundtable working group industry-wide and that the Commission forces everybody to come around that, because I can tell you that the labels won't do it. So they've already said they won't do it. And so please see what you can get the Commission to do some work, please.
All right. Before you answer, let's collect some more, because I saw a range of reactions. We had one over there, yes? And then I think, Portrait, did you also have your hand up? Yes. And you as well, right? So let's collect some. Go ahead. Yes.
Hi, my name is Nicolas Becker. I'm from the German Informatics Society. We represent 20,000 computer scientists. And from our community, I can tell you that I'm rather concerned when I hear this discussion, because you have to realize that European AI research is already being left behind. All the cutting-edge research is mostly done within the US, and AI research really relies on the text and data mining exception. So when you suggest getting rid of that, that would not only mean basically abandoning the research, the AI and computer science research in Europe, but also be a problem for researchers in general, because it is not only computer scientists that rely on the TDM exception, it is social scientists, it's all kind of research. So I'm really concerned that we could break the European science ecosystem when we touch this topic. And I completely understand your perspective, Matthias, but I think this is also, it's a different creative industry, and we also have to take these concerns into consideration.
Okay, maybe you can just pass the microphone forward. I think directly in the line in front of you there were two there, and then we'll go over to you. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm actually going to piggyback a little bit on this point. My name is Alexandre Saunier. I just took on a professorship at Lucas School of Art here, and actually yesterday I had the chance to host Portrait EXO. So there is a huge demand in universities, actually in art schools, to actually tackle those questions that relate to technology, that relate to the sciences. Now it's interesting because in the European context, art schools are not part of the universities historically. They're really two different systems. So when we get to those questions of art and technologies, lots of artists tackle those topics we're addressing now since the 60s, and often found refuge in universities or like in underground places, actually. But what's happening maybe nowadays is that because of this historical divide between art schools where we learn about music, we get taught cinema, and we cannot access the universities, and that's really just institutional. There is no it's really hard to do research in the art, research in relation to computer scientists, research with other like disciplines actually. And to broaden actually in the point of like broadening the question, but also asking about what we could do there. I have the feeling that lots of the questions that we're addressing right now, from an artistic perspective, from a creative perspective, demand this form of research, this ability for artists, and artists in the really broad sense of the term, creatives, to engage with like scientists, to engage with like technologists, to engage with social scientists, which is unfortunately too hard, well, really hard to do nowadays. There are like lots of directives, thanks God actually, for like research in the art, pushed by the EU, and a lot in like 2020 actually. But I would say that there is a huge amount of artists from the undergrounds dealing with technology that are finding refuge in the academy, that find refuge in the underground, in a sense, and that fostering those forms of dialogues within education will actually, well, already there are people doing that, so there's already fruits that could be grabbed pretty soon. But on the longer term, actually, it might help better understand what is the role of copyright, what is the role of the relations between art and sciences, and maybe address actually those questions through opening new models, new avenues, rather than just answering to what is happening right now, but maybe foster new models.
All right. Before we go to the two of you, let's quickly give the panel here a chance to respond, but I have you on my radar. So what I'm hearing here from the audience is that there's potentially a conflict of interest or perspective here between or at least some of the creatives on the one hand who say we need more protections of what we do and what we create, and on the other hand saying, well, that is actually the raw material, that's the fuel for an important kind of creativity, innovation that would be stifled there. Alexandra, if I can go to you first and then also hear what the rest of the panel has to say. Do you feel that there is a way to square that circle? Is there something that could be done to both heed what Matthias was saying and what I think you also emphasized, but then also going to you? Is there a squaring the circle scenario for you, or does it have to be one or the other, or 50% of each?
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer that question, because I suppose you are the creatives of the room. I think I'm quite creative on policy matters, but not so much on art. So I was listening with a lot of interest. That's something I never thought about, that division between art schools and universities and how that keeps people from engaging with each other. So it's super interesting, but I don't have a solution right now. I was, my political brain was saying, well, Horizon, there might be some kind of funding, but you probably thought of that. So I take the point and I keep thinking about it, and I think the more creative part I would leave it to Matthias. I would like to answer the first question on what can we do in the Garcia Blanco report. I think lobbying the Commission is always super important, because at times they listen more to you, to the industry, if the right people go there, doing events about it. But I think I'm telling you things you already know. One interesting thing, there's the Commissioner hearings coming up. So sending specific question, reaching out to the MEPs who will sit in the Commissioner hearings. So that would be the Cult Committee, definitely in the European Parliament, and checking out, it would come out in the next days, which committees will listen to which commissioner. So checking out who would be responsible for picking up that topic, reaching out to the members of Parliament who will be sitting in those hearings, asking them for meetings and sending questions that could be asked. I think that is very helpful in this phase to focus the attention of your topic. So I think that's a question I can answer with some kind of competence.
Matthias, and then I also wanted to get to you, Teresa. In particular, this question about getting rid of TDM and just slamming the brakes on some of the, maybe from your perspective, too liberal copyright regime. Is there a way of squaring that circle, of making both of you happy, do you think?
Maybe, because I think I understand the ratio. I understand the reasons you bring up. And if we agree, maybe on the necessity to get your fuel full, there's one crucial question: who should pay for that? And this is the question we have to pose. Why would we do so? Why would we pay for the European future? Why doesn't Europe pay us for bringing up the fuel for your systems? This is so easy.
All right, we'll just let that question hang there and sink it in. In the meantime, before I get back to the two of you, Teresa, from a community perspective, do you see a way? Is there some kind of, I don't know, golden path in between, but also a way to put these two together in a way that works and that makes your constituency happy, but also, in Brussels, commonly it is, regulation versus innovation / competitiveness, right? That's the common refrain here. But maybe that's a false opposition. I don't know how you feel about that.
Definitely, we feel that's not enough to cover all the interests of the public interest institutions and all the users. As I said, we are not being heard in our needs and our interests. So. And I don't think creators are also being heard, because you mostly hear from right holders, and we should also make a differentiation between creators and right holders. And how do we address remuneration to creators when the right holders are the ones that can opt out from AI training and are the ones that might have a claim of remuneration immediately coming out from the act? So maybe there is something there to do in terms of addressing their interests of vis-a-vis the interests of the right holders. And there's, of course, I think, also opportunities to address the needs of public interest institutions, knowledge institutions. I think what the TDM exceptions, both of them tried to create, was a framework that was distinct because of the different public interest activities that were related with scientific research. And we would hope, and that's our main hope, that we don't reopen that discussion, because that's our main concern. We don't care so much about commercial training. We care about not reopening a discussion that is that led to a framework that is supportive of scientific research and public interest activities. So that's, of course, our main concern. But we also care about the balance that and the practical mechanisms that now need to be discussed to ensure that that supposed balance that these two exceptions try to create do not unfairly or not put creators in a position of not benefiting from that balance as well. And I agree with Matthias. I mean, we need to work, and that's why I wanted to pause the discussions on reopening the TDM exceptions discussion and move forward on other mechanisms such as the remuneration mechanisms. But there as well, I think the public interest has something to say as well. You know, you cannot consider just fair remuneration, as I said, to creators is obviously important. We, as a public interest institution or a civil society institution that defends the public interest, we support those discussions, but we also there will have something to say on how do we also ensure that some money goes to public infrastructure, goes to public interest institutions, and maybe there are different mechanisms, as I said. Maybe there are some taxes there, and there are some unwaivable remuneration rights to protect the creators, and maybe there is collective licenses to also consider. So I think maybe there's a collection of different remuneration systems and mechanisms of compensation that address the different interests of the different parties.
Yeah, let me just add to that, and then I want to go back to you, that I think sometimes we have a tendency of trying to create tools that do justice to the specificity of each individual case. You know, how much money should you get? How much should Alexandra get? How much should you get? And sometimes that becomes so complicated that it becomes unworkable. So I'm sympathetic to the idea of maybe having sometimes a little bit blunter instruments that are at least workable. So something like a tax or something that is then funneled back into a somehow defined public interest in this, rather than trying to get it, you know, down to the single euro cent, right, how much everybody should get, and that then becomes unworkable. So there seems to be tension there. But finally, let's go back to you and then also to you, Portrait.
Yes. My idea is...
Could you also introduce yourself, if you want?
I'm Sarah Christianis. I'm a university student, and I'm currently starting my first day at the Commission.
All right.
I'm just very interested in the topic, and since it was also about brainstorming ideas, if a rule would be in place where AI companies are required to train their models based exclusively on the work of artists that have been registered on a platform, thereby giving their consent, we could protect the rights of artists. Then, in order to not stifle innovation, we could reduce the price for research institutions and augment the price for commercial use. This is just an idea.
All right. Yeah, thanks very much. And you can just pass the micro on to Portrait over there.
Hi, thank you so much for this dialogue. I've been craving this particular type of combination of humans to come together. So thank you so much. And the idea of taxation, I think, is a really important, and perhaps, like you mentioned, a practical and easier, one of the solutions, perhaps, and redistribute the income somehow, because the end goal has to be universal basic equity, universal basic income, or some sort of that. And perhaps we do need to tax companies that are open access and closed source, such as OpenAI. I don't know what's going to happen with Suno and Udio or other companies around that, but I think we do need to continue to keep in consideration what open source culture has continuously provided for creative solutions and innovation, simply because that culture allows this open way of working. the fact that there are humans in the world globally that have this ability to, say, hey, I have a piece of code and it's going to solve this problem, but perhaps it doesn't work, and someone else comes in and adds to it, and that's the whole beauty of open source culture, right? And so the challenge right now is trying to reconciliate all of these differences of the way people are going about it, like OpenAI not being the most ethical approach because open access, closed source, perhaps they need to pay a higher tax. And on top of that, they need to be enforced to figure out how to resolve the remuneration issue. Perhaps companies that are more ethical, there is less taxation. And because there are also we have collective intelligence in the form of AI right now, right? That didn't exist before. So just looking at, say, the optimistic side of what we have in the form of OpenAI, what if we could use large language models for democratizing education, democratizing therapy? There are actually already use cases of people using these large language models in that way. So again, it's about these nuanced conversations, I think, and just perhaps putting together as well urgent residencies, bringing together people from different backgrounds, working very closely with policy and change makers to create both artistic and scientific works to be tried and tested very urgently, because that's the optimistic side of the fact that we have tools that help us to actually brainstorm and create outputs at a very fast pace.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I have a final intervention from the floor, and that's Paul. So you can just pass the microphone back to the front.
I try to keep it very short.
Please do, indeed. I'm looking at the clock that's hanging behind it.
The first part of the discussion. So I think, as I said before, I think this discussion, TDM exception, we should pause it or not, is silly. You can just opt out, then there is no TDM exception, and that applies from the day you opt out. If you want to change the law, that takes 5 years in this town. So the ultimate thing to do is opt out. The thing I want to come back to is collective bargaining. I think one of the problems at the moment is that there's a very limited amount of companies who benefit from this, and the creators landscape, the rights holders landscape in Europe is incredibly fragmented, right? We still have organizations that deal with these questions in each of the 27 member states separately. We have lots of organizations who all want to be the ones who make a deal in the end. And in the end, this is sort of the classical divide and conquer. What needs to happen on this side is also questions about this territorial organization of copyright does not make a lot of sense in the context where you're dealing with a very limited set of entities who try to benefit from your work from outside of Europe. So I think creators, institutions, even across things, cultural heritage institutions should work together with publishers, along the value chain, to make a bigger offer that can be negotiated. All these concerns are things where you can probably make a difference. And I think this idea that there's a fundamental idea behind collective bargain. The bigger the group, the more power you can exercise, right? And I think that we can learn from some of the interventions in the first panel.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know whether any of you have any urgent things that you still feel you have to say. If there.
One remark.
Okay.
Yeah. It's one single, maybe 2 sentences. Ellen told us that they are negotiating every 3 years because tech evolves and union members have to adapt. The TDM exception is 5 years old. Maybe we should think about that. We have to adapt as well, individually and collectively.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead, Teresa.
One remark on the public registry, because I think that's a very interesting thought. Because we don't have currently an opt-in system, but an opt-out system, we have been defending, yes, we do need a public registry of opt-outs, so that we make sure that there is transparency and there is legal certainty about who has opt-out, and that it's easier then to also enforce the rights that the current TDM system provides to creators and right holders.
Okay, 2 sentences, Alexander?
Yes. I really like the past two interventions, and I think combining them would be sort of goes in the right direction. So having really strong collective bargaining, and that can't be territorial in Europe. It needs to be all of Europe. It needs to be a really strong organization, and then coming up with a different bargaining model, with a different remuneration model. Because one thing is to say we just opt out. Then everybody needs to do that. Do you get everybody on board? No, somebody will make deals. You know, it's exactly like Paul said, let's divide and conquer. But if we have European alternatives, and possibly more than one, but that maybe use open standards to work together and that offer a fair remuneration, you can opt out of the Google, Microsoft, whatever, and opt into a better model that offers remuneration. And then you call that innovation. Because I really like when you asked that question, it got a little bit lost in technical details. The framing, the narrative of innovation, this is what is killing everybody else. That you frame this totally extractive industry that takes content away and makes money on advertising. In the end, that is framed as innovation. Why is that innovation? I mean, innovation is improvement that makes people's life better, and that makes sure our creative industry is adequately remunerated and we can enjoy your work and the artwork in the next 10, 20 years in long term, and gives you the way to live with. That should be innovation. And this is what we should be framing. But in order to do that, it is not enough to say, you know, what we want to do is to get rid of the TDM exception, and I don't have a particular opinion on that, whether that's a good idea or not. But you need to have something where you look forward, say, you point to this is the model of the future that we want. That's about renovation. And just because large language models were mentioned, it's also about energy and it's about democracy, because what we experience it now, these models consume enormous amounts of energy. Microsoft is reopening 3 Mile Island, the nuclear reactor in the United States. Peter Thiel is investing in a nuclear startup, and I don't think that's good news. The negotiations, shady negotiations going on in Italy about building data centers and the correlated energy infrastructure. And we know this is not doable with renewables, and everybody in the industry is saying we need nuclear, we need nuclear, and we need nuclear. These are democratic decisions that we are taking in our countries, and I come from a country where decisions about energy are really the core of political discussions we have in society, and these people are taking that out of our hands. That's not democracy, that's not innovation. So really the framing of what is innovative and speaking about models that are forward-looking and not backward-looking and framing that as innovation, that is really the important thing we have to do. And then we can come up with the instruments.
All right, thanks, Alexandra. Let me ask you to the stage. Oliver Rötig, General Secretary of UNI Europe. We just heard keywords like collective bargaining, getting our act together, going beyond fragmentation across all the member states. So maybe that's like the perfect on-ramp for your final reflections on all the things that you've heard. Please.
Indeed. I mean, coming back at the end of the discussion to collective bargaining, I think is a good starting point for me. But first of all, let me thank the FES, Knut, the colleagues, Justin and Oliver like me, for preparing this meeting, and we always enjoy very much as UNI Europa the cooperation we have with FES. But now I don't really want to summarize, giving some ideas and also putting it into the broader context of the discussions of artificial intelligence from a trade union perspective. So the first key point is trade unions, workers are not against shaping the future and having change. This is just simply happening, so we can't stop it. We have to make sure that we shape it. That's a key point. And then the other issue with artificial intelligence, generative AI, that's nothing really new. We have new technology for decades, and actually over the years, over 40 years at least, we came up with some basic solutions to deal with challenges. And the first challenge is, of course, how do we make sure that those colleagues whose job is disappearing in one way or another find a new job? And how do we make sure that it's not rather a job where they have to go to a totally different area? It's rather about how can we bring technology in the job? It still means probably jobs are getting lost, but it's not your individual job is lost, it's just adaptive. And that we have to organize. And the second point is, which is always coming with technological change, there is a productivity gain. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. And so how is this productivity gain distributed between the workers, the creators, and those guys who put in the money. So we are talking about managing transformation. And that takes me to money. And when we talk about transformation at the European level at the moment, everybody talks about a big industrial policy. But when you look at it, billions, if not trillions, when I look at Draghi, should go basically in the manufacturing side. And we have to be quite clear, artificial intelligence is really hitting the services sector. That is over 50% of our economy. So how do we actually make sure that we have a transformation that is properly financed and can't be very rapid? I mean, I'm coming from the Ruhr area in Germany, the mining area, and this took 40 years to get out of coal. We don't have this time, so how do we manage this in a proper way? And quite frankly, if a factory closes, everybody knows about it, and there's a final end. If in services, whether it's in the creative part or it is in retail, the jobs just slowly disappear. People are not even fired, they're just not being replaced. So how do we organize this as a society to go ahead with this? But now from this rather broader picture to go, what do we do at the workplace? And what we of course want is we want humans in control, not under control. That is, I think, the key principle. And we saw this when we look at the writers and actors. It's copyright in the broader sense. How do you actually make sure that you can keep what you're doing? Alexander from FIFPro was talking about the football players, where they are basically totally controlled. And who owns these information? And when I go to Amazon, you have this as well, total surveillance. Who gets those data and what happens with those data? So it's basically spying and using data of workers, creators, and this must be justified, and the workers and the creators must be protected. That's one of the key points. And for that, we need a legal framework, but a framework that empowers workers. Specifically, we have this with the AI directive, but not for workers there. So we want to have a new directive on AI for workers, for the world of work. And of course, with a platform directive, we have a bit of a template for this as well. But we don't really want to have a straitjacket of individual rights. What we really want, and that comes back to the issue of collective bargaining, we want legislation which empowers trade unions, workers' representatives to negotiate collectively about the rules. And we have seen this with the examples from the United States about the Writers' Guild there. We can do this. We can get solutions by collective bargaining, and the examples which have been given in the US are actually feeding into Europe. Our unions are starting to negotiate on this as well. One problem when we talk of legislation, however, is, somebody was saying it takes 5 years to change something there. I mean, 5 years in generative AI, we already have 2 generations, so that doesn't really work. So what we actually need to do, we need to empower the people at the workplace, which are the employers and the trade unions, that they can self-regulate it. They are the closest to the workplace. So how do we organize this? And that's one question. And then the key question is, when we look at generative AI in particular, is how do we make decision-making if there is a black box? We know the input, we know the output, but not really happening what is happening in the system. And there we need a framework, and there we need a legal framework as well as good collective bargaining frameworks to shape this. And what we need to do that in the end, for the outcome, a real person is responsible, that the process is comprehensible and transparent enough for workers, for their representatives, and I think for business leaders as well, because they don't understand this properly as well, and they need to be challenged. These are some of the key things, and that we have to see to get the empowerment at European level, that we can do this as workers, as creators, that we really have a voice and a say to make sure that the regulation keeps up with changes and is in a way that really finds solution. And there again, it doesn't work with individual rights set by the legislator. It only works in the end if the collective representation of the both sides of industry are properly empowered to find the solution in a speedy way, so that we actually can find solutions now and not racing after it all the time. So thank you very much for this great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, it strikes me that we have more than enough food for thought, food for action, maybe also a little bit, maybe a few more concrete ideas. The one thing that's missing, of course, is food to eat. Before we go to that, let's thank the panel for the fantastic input. Thanks to you for coming. Thanks to the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. There we go. With that, I'd like to close this morning of thinking about generative AI and the world of work and invite you all to join us over there for lunch. Thank you so much.